He's immensely seductive. Quite sure he's right. Obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
What? This is the end game.
All right, everybody. It is Wednesday, March 19th, 2025, the 59th day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. Welcome, everyone, to the Wednesday live stream. If you are watching on Rumble, you probably, well, at this point, they've probably got knocked out if they're not on Rumble Premium. But for paid subscribers on Substack, that is the place to watch unless you are also a subscriber to Rumble Premium. That is a Rumble thing. That's not a me or my show thing. But it's going to be streamed on Rumble Premium and on Substack. So I hope everybody has come to that understanding. If people are kicked off Rumble, maybe you are hearing this at a later date, and I do apologize, but that's how we're doing the Wednesday subscriber stream for now. And with that noted, let's go ahead and get into things. Yesterday, Donald Trump had one of the greatest posts just ever. And you'll quickly see why. All he did was repost someone else's post. But to preface, on Monday, we discussed the issue of the auto pen relative to Joe Biden and the pardons that were technically not actually signed by the fake and illegitimate president. And of course, if you are a fake and illegitimate president, that role doesn't really come with the option of submitting real pardons that carry real legal weight on into the future. And when you are not a real or legitimate president, none of your actions as fake president carry real weight into the future. And we are well on the path to recognizing that on a widespread scale at this point. This was Donald Trump yesterday. He reposted on Truth Social a post from one of his former comms people, a woman named Liz Harrington. You can find her at Real Liz USA over on Truth Social. So Donald Trump, from his Truth Social account, copied the link to her post and then posted that as a standalone post. So Liz Harrington's post reads, "We could just invalidate the pardons and everything else Biden did because they stole the election and he was never elected president." There's that post. Wow, it just keeps, apologies. Actually, that works. You've seen it. Every time I click that link, it opens up a new page, and a new tab, and I was not noticing that. So it was still just on that one. But you saw the text of Harrington's post right there in Trump's forward. She is saying the same thing that I have been saying, and the same thing that John and I discussed over the weekend on Devolution Power Hour, and many other people have been saying it as well, of course. And I'm sure each and every one of you, if you've listened to my show for any significant amount of time, would have been saying the same thing as soon as the television started telling us about the auto pen issue. We could just invalidate the pardons and everything else Biden did because they stole the election and he was never elected president. She is exactly right. Donald Trump amplified that statement to all of his followers on Truth Social and to the country at large because people are checking his Truth Social. Let's see if actually, I didn't even bother checking to see if the media had covered this. Talking about invalidating Biden's pardons. Ah, man, we're not there yet, I don't think. I don't think that they have, I don't see a post here about Trump's reposting of Liz Harrington, but that's Donald Trump now pushing that. Okay. So it started out with the claims from Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey about Biden's dementia and his dementia as a justification for nullifying some of what the fake and illegitimate president was said to have done during the 4 years that he was pretending to be president of the United States. And then in the following days, or around the same time, perhaps there was mention of the auto pen before. I don't think so, but maybe. The auto pen thing came to the fore, and it was first a couple issues, and then it expanded. And now it's primarily focused on these pardons that he was said to have given to members of the similarly fake and illegitimate January 6th committee and his son, Hunter Biden, and others. How much was the auto pen used? Was the auto pen a valid presidential signature, even though the president had not signed it? It would come under the president's purview, and it would be his people putting those signatures out there. And if he does nothing about them, apparently we are just meant to assume that they carry the weight of a presidential signature, despite not being a presidential signature. And then we had CNN telling us about the fact that there was no clause for unpardoning in the Constitution, as if that is what Donald Trump was attempting to do. He wasn't attempting to reverse Biden's legitimate pardons. He was simply declaring that Biden's pardons were null and void and had to be because they weren't actually signed by the president. He was not the president, and he may not have even known about them. So now Trump is taking it a step further, and Trump taking these things a step further is usually the kind of opening salvo in the move toward taking these things mainstream. It's not just that Biden's demented and that's the cause for nullification. It's not just that the auto pen was used to execute presidential actions and that's the justification for the eventual nullification. Now we're moving to the stage where everything Biden did is nullified because Biden was not ever a real and legitimate president of the United States of America. That moment has always had to come. It is a necessary waypoint in this journey. If that moment is not reached, if that realization widespread among the American public is not achieved, then the whole thing's a failure. And moving on as though our elections are legitimate well on into the future, that should be readily seen as the end of this country. It is not possible to continue forward with fake elections and whichever uniparty candidates and representatives and senators, whatever, are installed in these public offices, whether it's at the local level, the state level, or nationally. And it's funny, I don't want to go too deep into this because I have not spent a ton of time digging on it. And I know that John is going to discuss this with Burning Bright this evening on Devolution Power Hour. But Donald Trump released an executive action on national preparedness. And here it is. This is today, whitehouse.gov. Achieving efficiency through state and local preparedness. Okay, and there's a lot that's interesting about this executive order, and they're going to get into it or this presidential action statement, or whatever the technical term for it is. But here in Section 1, under the purpose heading, federal policy must rightly recognize that preparedness is most effectively owned and managed at the state, local, and even individual levels, supported by a competent, accessible, and efficient federal government. So, if the individual level is not enough, and the local level is not enough, and the state level is not enough, then perhaps the federal government steps in to assist if it's something like an invasion across the southern border of Texas or New Mexico or Arizona or California, for instance. Then the federal government might have a role. Otherwise, preparing for things, and they list some of the possibilities here. These are kind of interesting as well. But preparing for some of these possibilities at the federal level is a little bit absurd. It's not where the problems can be best handled in the ways that will apply most directly to the communities facing the problems. And this presidential action recognizes that. One more here. Citizens are the immediate beneficiaries of sound local decisions and investments designed to address risks, including cyber attacks, wildfires, hurricanes, and space weather. Space weather. So I would suggest that perhaps what we're talking about here is the sun farting in our general direction, as we discussed at length last year. I'm not sure what else space weather can be. Space, of course, is a black infinite void that also has weather that affects Earth's weather somehow because of the sun, I guess. And these are going to be major problems potentially in the future. Further down in the executive order, let me just see. I have some notes that I sent to John earlier. Here were two things that I want to mention, and then I'll leave the rest of this to them for this evening. A shift from an all hazards approach to a risk informed approach. Move beyond information sharing to action and implement the national resilience strategy described in subsection A. So an all hazards approach means that they think of all these things that they need to be prepared for, no matter how likely or unlikely, and then devote all the resources they deem necessary to dealing with that problem. So problems that may not exist, like fallout from nuclear war, for instance, or any number of other things they've come up with, or another very deadly pandemic. Should we push a bazillion, or how about climate change, a bazillion jillion dollars toward preparedness for dealing with those problems if those problems might not exist? I think the answer would be no, but the policy has not reflected that answer. The policy has said, well, these would be such massive problems if they were ever to happen. And even if you want to say all those things exist, I would disagree with you. But even if you want to say that, that's fine. I wouldn't fight you on it. Everybody's welcome to their own beliefs about this stuff. Even if you believe they exist, the idea that they are highly likely, especially believing that they are highly likely at this point, I think is borderline insane. And people would be like, what do you mean? We're at war with Russia and we could possibly be at war with China over Taiwan. And Trump's talking about Iran getting a nuclear weapon right now. And we might have to go to war with Iran and the Houthis. Okay. If you believe those things, it's going to be very difficult to dispel those notions. But believing that we are in some grave nuclear threat from Iran when they don't have a nuclear weapon, we're told, while Trump has said that in his first term, he had basically reached an agreement to denuclearize with Russia and China, well, then you're running into things that cannot logically exist in the same realm. All right. And so you're going to have to give one of those up. And I would suggest that it is the reality of nuclear war. We cannot denuclearize with our greatest adversaries if other nations, rogue nations, North Korea, Iran, India, Pakistan, have nuclear weapons. We just had articles a couple of weeks ago about how the UK wouldn't be able to utilize their nuclear arsenal even if they needed to. Okay? That's where we actually are. So if we are devoting, as a federal government, immense resources all pinned on the backs of American, quote unquote, taxpayers after the fiat currency is created from nothing, we are wasting our resources and the labor and the good faith of the American people. So none of that should be done. And shifting from an all hazards approach to a risk-informed approach may mean, okay, we see that those are potentially problems. Let's focus on limited solutions based on the very, very limited possibilities rather than throwing everything at these total unknowns and in the process simply just enriching the friends of the regime and implementing the agenda of the regime in the process. And then one other section here I thought was very interesting after dealing with the fake and illegitimate Biden administration and the stories we had about their efforts to censor and disrupt the spread of misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. The presidential action says, for purposes of this order, critical infrastructure policies do not include any policies related to purported misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation, nor so-called cognitive infrastructure. Okay, and dealing with the disinformation, what was it? The Disinformation Governance Board, if I'm not mistaken, and some of those other units of DHS. And I believe that there were some in the State Department dealing with the censorship issues. They talked about the collective consciousness of the people, essentially the individual belief system collectively as the cognitive infrastructure of the American public. Labeling that critical infrastructure means that they have open to them a whole slew of new ways to deal with that problem. They can't let the cognitive infrastructure of the American people be compromised by misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. And then they allow themselves all these various powers to deal with those problems. And so it seems with this presidential action, some of that's being scaled back. And I think that that is nothing but a good thing. All right, let us continue forward. We are going to touch on the spacemen, because the Spaceman Splashdown was accomplished yesterday. And I think that that is the name, the proper name for it. SpaceX on X, formerly Twitter, covered the entire thing. This is a 2-hour and 15-minute long stream. Let's listen to a little bit of the play-by-play. If my internet will work.
That the crew worked on during this mission was a alternative exercise device. In microgravity, the crew has to exercise for about 2 hours a day because they're not having the effects of gravity on their body. So to prevent bone and muscle loss, we counteract that with 2 hours of exercise per day. On board the International Space Station, they have 3 ways in which they can exercise. They have a bike, they have a treadmill, and they have a similar to a weightlifting machine that counteracts the microgravity environment. But a particular experiment that this crew tested out was a combination of all 3 of those in one one smaller device. And this is really critical as we continue on to the moon, Mars, and beyond, because space is really important in spacecraft. So if we have something smaller that the crew might be able to utilize, that can potentially help us venture out even further into the solar.
Wow. I did not expect to arrive on such an opportune clip as the one we just heard. Exercising in microgravity. That's how they were able to keep their strength for these 10 months that they've been stuck in space. They were supposed to be up there, 8 days? And they were up there for nearly 10 months. And so they needed to use those machines and exercise with their microgravity. Wow. Let's get into... So here we are, barreling through...
And that occurs about 6,000
the atmosphere or something?
Above the ocean's surface.
And we are expecting drogue deployment at 2:53 p.m. Pacific, so we should see it any second now. And there you are getting a great view of Crew 9 inside Dragon Freedom as it returns back to Earth. We are awaiting the drogue deploys. This view coming from the WB-57 high-altitude plane. And
you're getting a great view of the crew, she just said. Well, there's no view of the crew. That's basically the tip of a bullet flying through the sky.
There you see it on your screen, drogue deployment.
You can hear the crowd here.
They just cheered for the parachutes. And I get it. It makes total sense. You don't know if they're going to go off. Anything could happen.
The crowd here very excited as Dragon Freedom continues to make its way back to planet Earth.
So this is the view from inside while you look up toward the parachutes.
Next up, we'll stand by for the main deployment of the parachutes. The mains are quite a bit larger. You'll be able to notice the difference on your screen once they deploy, and they continue to ensure that the Dragon spacecraft slows down even further. As we mentioned, Freedom will be traveling 16 miles per hour when it splashes down off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida, here at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon. And there we go.
We have visual on 4 healthy mains.
That view was from inside.
Freedom copy.
That view was from inside one of the buckets where the parachutes are located. So we see a great view.
So now we have the parachutes. They are out of the buckets. Now we have all 4 of them here. Oh, the spacemen themselves.
Glass-like ocean off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida. Crew 9 just minutes away from splashing down.
This is really such an incredible shot. That was
600.
That was a live view from our recovery vessel, Megan, which is stationed a couple miles away from the splashdown site. We can see the crew there using their restraints as resting places for their arms. They were just in space moments ago, so their arms are able to float freely.
400 meters.
They were just
a gorgeous bluebird day here that we have.
They were just in space moments ago. Haha. And here we have it. This
and splashdown. Crew 9 back on Earth.
And SpaceX Freedom, splashdown. Good main release.
Copy, splashdown. We see main chutes cut. Nick, Alex, Butch, Sunny, on behalf of SpaceX, welcome home.
It is an amazing.
So there we have it. They are just floating around in the water, waiting to be extracted. There's a boat. And let's continue with some different footage here of the Spaceman Splashdown. Hold for processing. Here we are. Oh, wait, that's just the splash. We just watched the splashdown. Let's go directly to our highly intelligent sea mammal friends, the dolphins. You see, because it wasn't enough of an emotional impact just to have these spacemen splash down. We need to make it super cute. The dolphins are saying, wow. Now, to a lot of people on the internet, apparently, this is total confirmation that all of this is real. And to normal people, this is one of the dumbest things they've ever seen. but we are dangerously short on normal people these days. Oh, man. It's funny. Elon Musk named Grok after the word from who the writer who coined that word is Douglas Adams, if I'm not mistaken. Apologies. It was Robert Heinlein in Stranger in a Strange Land. But Elon Musk's AI, also named Grok, is inspired by Douglas Adams' style of humor and wit as seen in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but the name itself comes from Heinlein's work. Oh, okay. So I had that part wrong. But he has made his affinity for Douglas Adams clear in the past. And it's funny because so this is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy movie. And I want to play just a little bit of this. This is the opening of the film. And so we start out here with dolphins.
Important and popular fact that things are not always what they seem.
So there they are flipping around.
On the planet Earth, man had always assumed that he was the most intelligent species occupying the planet, instead of the third. The second most intelligent creatures were, of course, dolphins, who, curiously enough, had long known of the impending destruction of the planet Earth. They'd made many attempts to alert mankind to the danger, but most of their communications were misinterpreted as amusing attempts to punch footballs or whistle for tidbits.
And I just want to speed up till the end here. There begins a magnificent song. So long, and thanks for all the fish. And then let's just get here to the end. Come on, fishies. Dolphins love space. Everybody knows that. And yes, I know that dolphins aren't fish, as I said at the beginning. Somebody's going to hear that and think, dolphins aren't fish. Yes, I get it. Now, last night, Elon Musk donned a jacket with a Star Wars patch that is also from the Air Force Academy. I understand I posted the link earlier, and I'm going to show it to you in just a second. But Elon's got this great jacket on, and he is being interviewed by a man who consistently wears a CIA lapel pin.
Elon, first of all, what a triumph to the human spirit, human ingenuity, engineering. First of all, on behalf of, I know many people in this audience, thank you for what you did for those astronauts today. How were you feeling, throughout the day? I mean, I know I felt butterflies in my stomach, and I rarely feel them.
Well, I'm actually usually a little nervous about these returns because there's always some risk that something could go wrong. But thanks to the excellent work of the SpaceX team working with NASA, the astronauts are now safely home. And so congratulations to the SpaceX NASA teams on excellent work and a huge note of appreciation to President Trump for prioritizing and expediting their return.
You have been the chief engineer of SpaceX and remain the chief engineer of SpaceX. It is the first private company to ever make it to orbit. Walk us through the beginnings of that. It is not, it's something that nobody else has been able to accomplish.
Well, it's quite a long story. And there are some books that have been written about it. But in the beginning, we didn't actually know anything about rockets. So our first 3 missions failed, actually, of our Falcon 1 rocket. And we almost ran out of money and just barely made it with the 4th launch. If the 4th launch of Falcon 1 had not succeeded, we would have failed as a company. So we just barely made it. So I have to say that I was not a very good chief engineer in the beginning, but I did learn over time. And I think we've gotten, at this point, to where the vehicle is very reliable. And we are going to be able to take astronauts to Mars. In fact, we want to take anyone who goes to Mars and ultimately build a self-sustaining civilization on Mars. That is the long-term goal of the company. Make life multi-planetary.
I mean, that is a very bold vision. How long do you think that might take SpaceX to be able to accomplish?
I think we could do it in 20 to 30 years.
Mm-hmm. So really, in our lifetime, if God blesses me with a longer life than I deserve, right? I could always hope. I would love to be able to see that. That would be amazing. I happen to have a telescope, and I love to look at the stars in the sky and the planets. And I am amazed at the majesty of all of creation and the idea that we even look at the moon and we can go there and come back, or a space station, or you launching the hundreds of satellites you have. I want to ask you this question, if I may, and it's.
All right. So it goes on like that, of course. And everybody is welcome to make their own decisions about this stuff. Honestly, like, I think it's absolutely nuts that people believe these two idiots were stuck in space for the last 10 months. And they were being brought supplies and Christmas decorations, but couldn't be brought home. And then 4 astronauts fly up there. 4 astronauts come back, and now we got some other people up there. Weren't they worried that they would be stuck in space too? No, now we can just do it 100% of the time. There is too much nonsense to even begin picking it apart. And because no piece of the nonsense will prove to someone who is unwilling to let go of these kind of deeply indoctrinated beliefs that they're wrong, people are going to hold on to them and dismiss all the nonsense and accept whatever explanation is given to them that makes enough sense. Hey, how come their muscles weren't totally atrophied? Well, you see, they have 3 different kinds of exercise gear in the microgravity environment, and they spend 2 hours every day working out on that gear in the microgravity environment to be able to continue their strength. I don't know even how you would say that. Maintain fitness. Are they fit? I don't know. Yesterday we were told that they might not be able to get up and walk because of the lack of gravity that they've had. They've just been floating around the whole time. I don't know what to tell people about this stuff. Is it possible that there is a house suspended in the air and that people go live there for a little while? Us and the Russians and the Japanese, every now and then we just send some people up there and they live there for some sort of time, some amount of time. An 8-day trip turns into a 10-month abandonment. And they all come back to Earth safe and sound because Elon did it. Elon did it. And of course, I'm largely a fan of Elon Musk. I'm not 100% certain he's a good guy. I hope that he is. He seems like he's doing good things right now. He's obviously the target of a widespread hate campaign. People are exploding Teslas at Tesla dealerships. And this is being framed as domestic terrorism. And to the extent that a great many Americans own Teslas, and to the extent that there is a mass campaign among the uniparty left and regime leftists and global communists to destroy Teslas in fire, I think that that's probably enough to qualify as domestic terrorism. We were called domestic terrorists for saying that masks don't work and that maybe that George Floyd murder didn't go exactly how the TV said. In Hollywood, you could be called a domestic terrorist just for failing to post a black square on Instagram in recognition of St. George Floyd being suffocated by a police officer's knee after overdosing on fentanyl while trying to pass off counterfeit $20 bills. So as far as domestic terrorism is concerned, if I was a person who owned a Tesla, and I'm not, I think that I would be, if I was in a blue city where I used to live in Los Angeles, I used to live in Austin, Texas. If I was in either one of those cities and owned a Tesla, I guess I would have at least some small concern that someone might try to blow up my car based on what's being fed in on the internet. And if it's all true, then it's the fault of the arsonists and those committing the acts of domestic terrorism. But of course, if it's not true, then it's just we are being terrorized by whoever is running that info op or that psyop. Now, I have at least ample reason, I guess, to believe that that sort of terrorism could be happening, but it's not necessarily true. So Elon is the target of all of this blowback, all these attacks, because he is the public-facing communicator of this effort to begin dismantling the bureaucratic administrative deep state. This Spaceman Splashdown once again confirms for people that Elon Musk is the hero that we've all been waiting for. And the reaction to Elon Musk with the Spaceman Splashdown on X, formerly Twitter, has been one of the most intense grovels I've ever witnessed. Just people enamored with Elon Musk. They cannot believe it. I turned on Dan Bongino's replacement, Vince Coglianese. I think that's the Italian way to say his name. I don't know how he says it. He just goes by Vince now. He took over Dan Bongino's Rumble account, and it's 3.5 million followers. He had a 2-part Tucker Carlson interview for the first 2 episodes of his show, and then today he was just essentially doing a live stream, like a mass media kind of live stream with a producer in the room, but he was still checking chat and stuff, which is good for him. But the subject matter of his show and the way it was presented was the remedial class for child brains, for standard issue villagers. And it's embarrassing. The point he was making was how great it was that these people who should have been brought home were stranded in space by the Biden administration, while the people who shouldn't be here were brought in by the Biden administration. So Trump is getting rid of the people who shouldn't be here and bringing home the people who should be here. And so we should all be overjoyed at all of this. Now, again, if you want to believe these things, all good, okay? I am so far past the point where I am interested in engaging the conversation about whether or not these things are real with people who believe everything they see on the television and saying, yeah, that's not real. And then having to have the argument about why that particular thing is obviously not real and what that means and how we can know that over the course of a long time, because it's impossible to explain that long time for them. Okay. It's never going to work. And it doesn't make sense to attempt it. It is an epistemological problem that cannot be disproven with evidence online from authoritative sources. And the people who demand that sort of thing are clearly subject to the epistemological problem. Okay? That is the intellectual kids table, very likely, that has done that to them. But that is the child-brained reasoning system. And engaging with that at this point is pointless. Okay? And people are like, well, how are you going to wake up the normies? A, the mission is not to wake up the normies. Okay? B, that's not how normies wake up. If they want to have the epistemological conversation and they are willing to admit that, no, they don't actually know any of these things, well, then we can start picking apart lower level claims. But we at least have to understand at the epistemological level that there is no evidence for these things, and therefore I am not required to disprove them. Okay? Let us continue. We can move on from the Spaceman Splashdown. And, you know, Elon's going to keep saying on X, formerly Twitter, that we're about to go to Mars. He just said we're going to begin setting up a civilization on Mars within the next 20 to 30 years. And if you say, hey, that's retarded, well, then you are going to be met with, oh, so you're saying Elon's lying to everybody? Well, if he's not lying, he's certainly communicating something that is being widely misunderstood. And he knows that the way he's communicating it is producing a widespread misunderstanding. So it's entirely possible that he's lying. And you can argue that he's lying for some necessary concern, to alleviate some necessary concern. And I would say, okay, well, maybe that's right. Maybe he's lying for a good reason, although that is a very, very difficult moral argument to make, especially when the people he's communicating to are adults who are attempting to guide themselves through the impossibilities of this existence. Okay? I don't think that anyone is benefited by these widespread lies, especially about stuff like setting up a civilization on Mars. But I'm not privy to all these decisions or reasons. I don't know what the purpose is. I know that I don't believe any of it. And if you believe some of it, all good. Okay? I would hope that you're believing it based on some epistemology that you can turn to and say, yeah, I think I have good justification for believing these things. Not, well, you got to replace my belief, or, well, you got to explain to me why they're doing all this. No, I don't. And no, I don't. Okay? Believing things for which you have no basis for belief is a choice that you are making. All right? And I don't need to replace the belief with something else. And I don't need to tell you why people are lying. All right? If you have a different epistemology than I have, that's fine. Go off in your own direction and come to your own conclusions. All right? I don't even care if people believe what I believe. And I'm not trying to convince anybody to believe what I believe. I am trying to talk through a series of extraordinarily complicated psyops that are clearly meant to manipulate the public and to manufacture their consent in one direction or the other. And when your consent is being manufactured, you cannot and should not assume that it's for a good reason. If it was all happening for a good reason, then they should be able to convince us of what their goals are and how they wish to reach those goals. Okay? Now, if you want to say that's the right process, but that process may well be impossible right now because everyone has been so indoctrinated and so brainwashed into existing in this false reality, and they will be unable to make the leap or unwilling, okay, then all right. What you are then asking for is a gap that will be filled with our patience and understanding, okay? And I can get on board with that to an extent. The extent to which I can get on board with that is the extent to which remedial classes in an elementary school are separated from the advanced classes in the elementary school or even the normal classes, okay? And if people who should be and can be and are perfectly capable of being in the normal classes or the advanced classes are being held back in the remedial classes until the people least likely to be able to advance at all actually advance, then we are not advancing. Okay? And that's the concern. Because when you have the mass media operation keeping even the people capable of full advancement back in the remedial class, then we should assume we're going to be stuck there forever until people decide to move on from the entire thing on their own. Okay? And so I care about finding the people who are being stuck back there, who have no need for the remedial course, who are perfectly capable intellectually and emotionally and spiritually of moving to the normal classes or the advanced classes and saying to them, hey, you are keeping yourself subject to these psyops, to this indoctrination, to this brainwashing, and you are being held back into the remedial course of your own volition. Okay? If someone else has other purposes, or if you want to believe that the mission at large consists of those other purposes, all good. Okay? I don't believe that. And I don't operate that way. And I'm not going to operate that way. And I don't think that my audience wants me to operate that way. So, of course, I will not ever change out of that. The insane thing is to think that advancing people out of the remedial class is somehow being done to trick them, because then they feel isolated, and that will be bad. Here's how you don't feel isolated in the normal class and the advanced class. Bring other people along with you, okay? Because I personally have great faith in God first and foremost, but humanity created in God's image and their ability to move beyond this indoctrination and brainwashing, knowing that that brainwashing and indoctrination come from an evil place meant to deceive and enslave and exploit. All right. I believe that 99% of people, maybe we could say 94 to 96% of people, I know people like those numbers, are perfectly capable of moving well beyond the media indoctrination, the regime indoctrination. And they're not doing that. And we're not there. And why is that? Well, I would suggest it's for reasons like this. Now, while we are talking about epistemology, let us have a look at the Kennedy assassination files issue. Here is Donald Trump from the other day. He visited the Kennedy Center and had a meeting, I guess, in the basement or something. And apparently they're going to redo the entire Kennedy Center. He's going to change the look of everything. But here he is, way far away from the boom mics, in a video that really looks kind of interesting. But let's see what he says.
The JFK Files, what time will they be released?
Tomorrow after.
Tomorrow after.
Yes. Have you seen what's in the files? Have you read them?
I've heard about it.
Was there anything interesting?
It's going to be very interesting.
Was there an executive summary supplied to you, Mr. President?
No,
regarding
I'm
this?
not doing summaries. You'll write your own summaries.
I'm not doing summaries. You'll write your own summaries. They are, after all, journalists, reporters. That is what we are told. So Donald Trump yesterday followed through toward the end of the day, after people were fairly convinced it was going to be a rugging of the size and scale of the so-called Epstein files. Donald Trump finally posted, I think they came out a bit before this, but his announcement was posted on Truth Social at well into the evening. Let me share this. And he provides the link archives.gov/research/JFK. President Trump ushers in a new era of maximum transparency. President Trump promised maximum transparency and a commitment to rebuild the trust of the American people in the intelligence community and federal agencies. Part of that promise was to fully release previously classified records related to the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. President Trump's executive order 14176 stated, the continued redaction and withholding of information from records pertaining to the assassination of JFK is not consistent with the public interest, and the release of these records is long overdue. Again, consistent with the public interest. Public mandate says we want these files. We do not want the government keeping secrets from us. And Donald Trump, once again, acts in alignment with the public mandate. The president announced that these records should be released without redactions on Tuesday, March 18th. Upon receiving the president's decision, DNI Tulsi Gabbard immediately sent out a directive across the IC conveying his directive to provide all unredacted records within the President John F. Kennedy assassination records collection to the National Archives and Records Administration for immediate release. Starting today, the records will be available to access either online or in person via hard copy or on analog media formats accessible to the American people at the National Archives, blah, blah, blah. The release consists of approximately 80,000 pages of previously classified records that will be published with no redactions, additional documents withheld under court seal or for grand jury secrecy, and records subject to Section 6103 of the Internal Revenue Code must be unsealed before release. NARA is working with the Department of Justice to expedite the unsealing of these records. Grand juries from many years ago have already seen them, so most of this information is already out. But regardless of this, the information will be immediately released upon the direction of the court. So most of the information was already out. And again, much like the Epstein files, we talked about this after the very base and red-pilled conning influencers totally rugged the American public with the ridiculous photo shoot they did outside the White House, simping and posing, and then pretending to have gotten all this information and talking about how cool it was that they, the independent media, had been given that information so that they, the independent media, well paid and totally publicized on mainstream internet-based media platforms, would be delivering this information to the public rather than the mainstream media. But they are the mainstream media. They are a new, different version of the mainstream media, but still the mainstream media. And so what we wanted was the full document dump. And now we have been given something that more closely resembles that style of release, except to the extent that much of this was already released. So in discussion of the Epstein files rug, we talked about what actually might be in there, okay? The Epstein issue, Epstein, the arrest, I think, was in 2019, so nearly 6 years ago. The Ghislaine Maxwell, was that 2021? Those issues are years old now. The actual events that took place leading to those arrests happened a decade ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, okay? So all of that time, whoever's been tracking those issues, whether it's our intelligence community, Israeli intelligence, Five Eyes intelligence, whoever it is, has had ample time to do whatever they deem necessary to cover up anything that might expose their real interests, okay? We're talking about getting the information from the people who would be exposed to the liability for what that information might contain. Now, if you had unaccountable authority to be able to manipulate the actual so-called evidence of any of these events, these crimes, the JFK assassination, the Epstein child trafficking, political influence, celebrity influence, whatever it might be, if you had unaccountable authority and access to that evidence, wouldn't you delete it? Wouldn't you destroy it? Wouldn't you get rid of it? Wouldn't you change it? Wouldn't you add fake evidence into the mix so that if anyone ever got hold of the evidence, they would be led down a series of nonsensical trails that ended nowhere? Of course you would do that. But for whatever reason, we've been led to believe, or perhaps we lead ourselves to believe that that's not how it works at all. That these people are keeping meticulous records of exactly what happened and exactly what was investigated, and that we are going to then be privy to all of them. Okay? Now, if there were investigative units, bodies, whatever, FBI, the Southern District of New York, the NYPD, whoever has the Wiener laptop, whoever has the full access to Hillary Clinton's deleted files, right? if there was ever a solid record of that stuff, it would be wonderful to get it. And again, I'm not trying to blackpill anybody. I'm trying to bring this back to some level of understanding what we are actually dealing with, because the problem is actually more complex than just getting someone into office and then that person releasing the files, and then all of a sudden we know the truth. Okay? There may be no way to know the truth. And if stuff is produced in those documents and we believe it's the truth because it's in those documents, that also does not mean that we have now discerned the truth. And that is, I understand, a very depressing thought to a lot of people who have been wishing for this sort of truth for a long time, because they believe these are the sorts of truths that are going to tear down this corrupt and illegitimate bureaucracy, the administrative state, the deep state, and all its members who have committed crimes against America and crimes against humanity. And in a perfect world, that would probably be true, but we're not in a perfect world. And it turns out that those people are the ones who have had control over all of this for a very long time. Now, if there are people within those bodies that have been good throughout that entire time, and they had the same access, and people might have thought they were bad, but they had access to that stuff, and they were able to somehow protect that information, shepherd it through, leak it out, move it elsewhere, whatever it is. Wonderful. Okay? I want answers on this stuff the same way everyone else wants answers on this stuff. But we have to prepare ourselves for the possibility that those answers are not where we thought they were. And we are now in the stages of getting the full release of the JFK files. Bay Theater Dave in the chat, hey Dave, says Trump did say they had it all. Yep, he sure did. And all of it might still not get us there. Okay? I have no idea what they're actually going to end up having. I think that they have it all when it comes to communications, recorded communications. All right. But in 1980, when all our households had rotary phones, did they have wires on everyone's phone line and they were recording all of it? You can say yes. Maybe the answer is yes. If the answer is yes, wonderful. I would love for there to be all of this evidence. But were they also tracked and listened to when they were meeting on park benches, for instance, as the old kind of movie trope goes? Kind of doubt it. That would require somebody going and taking contemporaneous notes of that meeting, and the person taking contemporary notes being honest and complete, and then us understanding it. Okay? So these are all epistemological problems that have to be wrestled with as we get ourselves through this process. Let us get to the files. And again, I'm not trying to blackpill about this stuff. It's just these are the things that we're going to have to deal with, because what happened yesterday was that we had these releases, and then immediately people got furious about what was in the releases. Let's go to some mainstream coverage of all this. This is the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail is mostly low-grade news articles on the left side, and then celebrity and bikini pictures on the right side. Essentially always. It's very strange. All the signs your coworker has had secret plastic surgery, from bat ears to bunny nose and subtle hairstyle giveaway. Ha! And they show Nicole Kidman and Tom Brady. So that is the sort of thing that we get from the Daily Mail. But let's just hit a few spots in this article. The headline, by the way, all the biggest bombshells in new JFK assassination files as Trump's own national security team is left stunned. And that was the big story from Monday night into Tuesday after Trump's announcement at the Kennedy Center that the documents would be released the next day. We are told that John Ratcliffe and others got very concerned because their organizations needed to know what blowback might be coming, what they were going to have to deal with in response to all of this being released. So, from the article, when the files were released around 7 p.m., it sparked widespread backlash from liberals claiming it was just a repeat of a similar drop by Joe Biden years ago, to MAGA fans angered that the pages still contained redactions and left questions, leading experts to describe the files as impenetrable. Experts have warned as they sift through the information that they do not expect the release to overturn the long understanding of what happened or earth-shattering reveals. So the long-standing interpretation of what happened was that Lee Harvey Oswald, acting alone, took shots at JFK and absolutely nailed him. And we actually have a little GIF of this provided by the Daily Mail. Oswald up here in the book depository, JFK taking the turn right in front of it, and then he got absolutely nailed. There were no second gunmen on the grassy knoll, none of that. Magic bullet, blah, blah, blah. So, one document was a memo released on a passage from the left-wing political magazine Ramparts from June 1967 about intelligence agent, CIA informant, and former U.S. Army Captain John Garrett Underhill. So, a passage from a magazine. The day after the assassination, Gary Underhill left Washington in a hurry. Late in the evening, he showed up at the home of a friend in New Jersey. He was very agitated. The passage starts. A small clique within the CIA was responsible for the assassination, he confided, and he was afraid for his life and probably would have to leave the country. Less than 6 months later, Underhill was found shot to death in his Washington apartment. The coroner ruled it a suicide. So, is that a reveal? Is that new information? No, and no. How about this headline? The uncensored rise of Barstool's Dave Portnoy, brushing off kinky sex tape and cuckolding humiliation to build audacious brand. Okay. Dave Portnoy is one of the most based and red-pilled guys there is. Thank goodness for him. So, I see in the chat, it was the CIA period. Yeah, maybe. Maybe it was Israeli intelligence. Maybe it was commies. Maybe it was the mob. Maybe it was Lee Harvey Oswald. Maybe it was the driver. Maybe it was Jackie Onassis Kennedy. All of the things. And again, also important to note, we're only like 20 hours into this, okay? So it's entirely possible that as people continue to dig on these files, and people definitely will, new information might emerge. It's entirely possible. There is a needle somewhere down at the bottom of this haystack that no one has found yet, okay? And one of the reasons why we're often not finding those sorts of things is because we rely on media coverage for all of this. One line in the document stated that the KGB watched Oswald closely while he was in the USSR, but files indicated that Oswald was a poor shot when he tried target filing in the USSR. Another detail released was a letter sent by a man named Sergei Zornono in 1978 to the British Embassy. He claimed that he was detained in London on July 18th, 1963, and questioned by authorities. Zornono, I think that's right, said that he told them about Lee Harvey Oswald, saying he planned to kill the president. He added that he warned American Vice Consul Tom Blackshear of the plans of Oswald, who tried to defect to Russia. You can't expect proper grammar or editing from the Daily Mail. This could be written by artificial intelligence for all I know. A few more notes from down at the bottom. This is John Greenwald, Jr. of the Black Vault. which boasts of being the largest privately run online repository of declassified government documents. He complained about the organization of the files. He said the search box is useless. As he wrote this, there are searchable sites coming up that analyze the documents and can provide reasonable search feature. So, people are going to be able to handle these problems. PDFs are still not OCR'd and searchable. No bulk download, no spreadsheet index of records. Okay, those are minor complaints that people will certainly work their way through over the course of the next few days. Many people were upset that there are still documents that have redactions in them. These look like hand markings crossing out parts of some of these documents. I'm not sure how that sort of problem can be solved. That's the sort of problem we were just talking about a few minutes ago. Ed Krasenstein posted, and again, Krasensteins are worthless. I totally get it, okay? These are just commie information operators or perhaps just ridiculous Judas goats or something. I don't ultimately know their status, but they say a bunch of really ridiculous things and should not be taken very seriously. But the response, they do represent one of the kind of upstream information sources for a certain brand of very online standard issue uniparty left villager. He says, wow, did Trump just release all of the same JFK files that Biden released in 2023? And he compares, on the left, you have Biden's release. On the right, you have Trump's release. The only difference on top of Biden's, it says 2023, and Trump says 2025. The word secret is crossed out in Trump's release. He says he hasn't gone through every file. That would be impossible. But at least a huge portion of it is all the same files that Biden released. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, because you would actually have to analyze and assess whether or not they were true. And you can see here that we have one. Una Panuna Banca. She picks out one of her favorites and says, the file I am particularly interested in is a CIA IG Inspector General report from whistleblowers alleging that the CIA hid information from Congress referencing the JFK assassination as it implicated them shortly after the assassination. We were given this as a tip, and there is actually a document. Let me see if I can grab the rest of this. I'll put that on the screen. We were given this as a tip, and there is actually a document we are currently tracking down. She also noted all JFK files can be found. She provided the link, and then she said, promises made, promises kept. Thank you at POTUS. You can all make the decisions for yourselves about whether or not the promises were made and the promises were kept. A lot of people have highlighted this post on X, formerly Twitter, from WikiLeaks. CIA suppressed top officer James Jesus Angleton's connection to Israeli intelligence, as shown by this newly unredacted JFK assassination records file. Angleton had subverted JFK's policy of preventing Israel from acquiring nuclear weapons and was praised by Mossad head Mir Amit as the biggest Zionist of them all. That's kind of incredible. Angleton was also found to have hidden documents from the Warren Commission on the assassination of President Kennedy. Shortly before he died, Angleton stated, the better you lied and the more you betrayed, the more likely you would be promoted outside of their duplicity. The only thing they had in common was a desire for absolute power. And that file was previously released in 2017, 2018, and 2022 in redacted form. Now we understand it's the Israeli intelligence service. Oh, man, I just realized now that I totally forgot to go into Elon's patch. We'll come back to it. Maybe. So not worth it. So now we have, it's the CIA, it's the Jews, it's Lee Harvey Oswald, it's a second gunman on the grassy knoll, it's the mob, it's going and going and going. Okay? People are going to have their own theories. Many of you in the chat, many of you in the audience have probably done years more research on the JFK stuff than I have done. Okay? It is not a focus of much of my attention, to be perfectly honest, for the epistemological reasons I mentioned earlier, and because, like, solving a 60-year-old mystery is, I don't know what achieving a solution could actually bring that we would need that solution to bring. Might it provide closure for people who have been shunted off into the void over this issue for 60 years? People in the baby boom generation who grew up with this as a formative trauma. It might. If it does, and I hope it does, then wonderful. Okay? But we can already understand there's no reason to trust the government. We can already understand that it wasn't just some psycho in a building taking pot shots at the president as he drove by after the entire trip and the route and all that had been rearranged, and they then immediately moved Lyndon B. Johnson in as president. And then Lyndon Johnson did the Civil Rights Act and all the other nonsense that he did. Big commie, that one. We can know those things without being provided the ultimate truth of the JFK assassination. Okay? And we're not going to get the ultimate truth right now, what we have gotten. And I'm just talking about the public effect as I am interpreting it, having watched this rollout over a day and watched people's reactions to it over a day, with the caveat that more information is certainly to come as people continue to dig through this stuff, okay? But here's what the New York Times is rolling out. Here's what to know. Oswald still did it, okay? So take that, conspiracy theorists. You got the documents that you've been begging for a very long time, and it proves that we were telling you the truth the whole time. This is the second release of Kennedy papers under Mr. Trump, who wanted to put them all out during his first term. He ultimately agreed to some redactions to protect sensitive intelligence gathering information. But Mr. Trump has said he no longer considers those redactions necessary, and he signed an executive order in January ordering everything be made public. Historians said they expected nothing earth-shattering from the latest release, but there is reason for intrigue. The FBI said in February that the agency had discovered about 2,400 new documents during a search after Mr. Trump's order, although it gave no indication what they might contain. And okay, fair enough. Maybe Kash Patel has access to these documents, and Kash will be the one who rolls them out. And Kash has developed a significant well of trust in the truth community, in and around the truth community. And we can hope that these documents contain some of that information that was more hidden than what was restricted at the National Archives. That would be wonderful. Maybe the truth is in there somewhere, and maybe we will get those documents at some point, and then that digging process will begin anew. And wonderful. I would love to get as close to the bottom of all of this as we can possibly get, understanding that there probably is no bottom. What's still to reveal? About 99% of the roughly 320,000 known Kennedy papers have been publicly disclosed since Congress passed a law in 1992 requiring their release according to the National Archives. But over 2,100 documents remain fully or partially withheld as a result of redactions, while another 2,500 remain under court-ordered seals and the like. That's in addition to the newly discovered FBI papers. The vast majority of excluded documents have actually been released with limited redactions, officials have said, including names of people still living, addresses, social security numbers, or locations of covert facilities. When the Biden administration released a raft of documents in 2023, officials said they were confident that none of the withheld information would change the basic understanding of the assassination. Every government authority has examined Kennedy's death has come to the same conclusion. He was killed by Lee Harvey Oswald with a rifle from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository on November 22nd, 1963. But polls have consistently shown that most Americans still believe that someone other than Oswald must have been involved. So the major takeaway after, again, admittedly, a very short time with the Kennedy files is that the central narrative, the official story, has been once again confirmed. And perhaps it has been revealed to the public that the intelligence agencies and their role in the Kennedy assassination have been protected for this whole time. Gosh, what a revelation. Again, not trying to blackpill. This is what is being fed to the public. And this is what the normies are going to believe. They're not waking up as a result of this release. Certainly not yet. Maybe we will get to that point through people's diligent research. And if this is your thing, by all means, research all of this diligently. Again, maybe there's a needle in the haystack somewhere. And I would love for someone to find it. And when you find it, I would love for you to deliver that information to me. And if you don't have the ability to amplify it, I will help you amplify it. Okay? That's the role I can play in a positive way to hopefully bring some more truth about this to the American public, if there is more truth there. It's also entirely possible that all of this has been tailored to reconfirm the official story as delivered by the Warren Commission. And we talked about this in relation to the 9/11 Commission as well. When they start these investigations in these congressional committees and they have all their subpoena powers so they can get all the information from everywhere and compile all the information within their cordoned off little bubble, decide what the story is going to be, like in the movies, you know, when a crime has been committed and everybody needs to get their story straight. So when they are questioned independently, they'll know how to respond and their stories will not conflict, thereby exposing them. They take months and months gathering all of the information, pulling it close to themselves, analyzing it within that little circle, getting the story straight, documented in the evidence in quotes, and then releasing the official story to the American public and saying, this is what we have. And then when we get all of the documents that are available after the commission has dealt with all of the quote unquote evidence, that's what remains. Anything they might have gotten rid of is gone. And so, is there going to be a smoking gun? Why wouldn't the people in charge of all the evidence remove the smoking guns that implicate them? Maybe at some point we will get down to a public understanding that the Dulles brothers were somehow involved in all this, or that George H.W. Bush was somehow involved in all this. But think about how those beliefs were formed for you if you are the sort of person that believes those things. Okay? You have researched information that is already out there and gone through. You've read books, you've looked at documents, you've thought about these things at great length, you've watched documentaries, you've had discussions with other truthers, you've dug as far as you can dig on all these things, and you've come to those conclusions. And you want those conclusions backed up by quote unquote evidence that somehow exists in the government documents. How did you come to your beliefs? Well, one thing we can be certain about is that it wasn't on the basis of government documents that have not been released. Okay? That is one thing that we can eliminate right off the bat. However you came to those beliefs, it was not from documents that have not been released. Therefore, it is entirely possible that other people can come to the same beliefs without getting documents that the government has not released before. Okay? That should be the end of the argument. But because I know that for most people it won't be, let's go further into it. The problem, the gap that needs filling, is not the existence of more government documents and government records, official records, contemporary records. Much further back than that, okay? It's an epistemological problem of how people form beliefs and what they deem to be authoritative sources. They still believe that official documents are authoritative sources, but official documents are not authoritative sources. Official documents, like everything else, are information among other information. That is a very, very difficult thing for people to reconcile. And that is unfortunate. And we have seen over the last few years, many people in the truth community unable to get past that, including people who were in Badlands. And that is very unfortunate. It is nonetheless the case that official documents are not authoritative sources. They are just information among other information. And if very smart, very well-researched people can come to very strong conclusions that are not supported by the official documents, but yet are very sound products of exquisite logical reasoning after a great deal of research, then that's the thing we need, okay? That can only happen once people solve the epistemological problem of believing in authoritative sources. We can spend all our time searching for the needle in the haystack. But for that needle in the haystack, even once we find it, to be convincing for the people who still have that epistemological problem, they would need to take that as an authoritative source that refutes everything else they've ever known as authoritative sources. And that's not going to happen. So, the problem, again, is much simpler. It is coming to terms with the fact that official documents are not authoritative sources and that there are not authoritative sources. And without coming to that conclusion, without crossing that mental hurdle, there is no way forward on these issues. If you think the normies are going to wake up because you give them an official document that says, actually, there was a second gunman on the grassy knoll, and it's this guy, that is not going to happen. The only way that would happen is if all the other authoritative sources they already trust tell them that that needle in the haystack now changes the entire story. And upon them doing that, we are still faced with the problem that they believe the mainstream media is the authoritative source and the bringer of new revelations. And when the mainstream media does that, the first thing you should assume is, oh, we're getting yet another limited hangout. Oh, they have a reason for doing this. What is it that they want me to believe and why? These are not authoritative sources. They are information among other information. The JFK files that were just released are not authoritative sources. They are information among other information. Okay? And if we are pinning our hopes for the future on the release of authoritative sources about issues that happened a long time ago based on information the enemy has possessed and controlled and analyzed and hidden the entire time while indoctrinating people with beliefs that affirm the official story, we are absolutely positively fucked. Okay? It's just the epistemological problem. Again, It is always the epistemological problem, which is why I do not want to spend my time first figuring out, but then arguing about the very specific details of complete and total fictions. Okay? I'm not saying the Kennedy assassination is a complete and total fiction, obviously. I'm saying that the official narrative is partly or mostly or all a fiction. And so to then gather information among other information, finding the needle in the haystack, treating it as an authoritative source, and then arguing with someone about the details. Well, okay, fine. I understand that document that's been hidden from us for 60 years shows that there was a second gunman on the grassy knoll, and his name is, Bob Lombardo from the Chicago mob, and he was set up through Kennedy's father and blah, 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 whatever it might say. But you're going to have to convince me that document's the one that I should trust, and not all of these documents that say Lee Harvey Oswald did it by himself. The New York Times just told everybody that the revelation is, oh yeah, Oswald still did it, but also there were these other influences. So an intelligence asset was tracked by or in contact with multiple intelligence agencies, and therefore the Jews did it, the Israelis did it, the Russians did it, the CIA did it? No. Okay? It's just no. How many people are tracked by the intelligence agencies? Does our intelligence community share intelligence with Five Eyes? With Israeli intelligence? Yes and yes. All of it? Maybe not all of it. Most of it? Probably. Could be all of it. It could just be that they're all feeding into the same big source. I guess it wouldn't be down, it would be up in kind of the centralization construct, right? If we're implementing a top-down global regime agenda, and these are instruments of that global regime handling whatever it is they're tasked with handling, pulling all that information and intelligence in, then one would expect there's a sharing process that eventually brings it up to the very top, or people close to the very top, I mean, people working, serving that role on behalf of, right? So even as we're told things work in our own government, we have 17 or is it 18 now individual intelligence agencies, and they coordinate and report through the director of national intelligence and on up to the president. So you would have these different intelligence agencies having different experiences tracking or working with different intelligence assets. That information would be collated and then pushed up the chain. We should expect the same thing is happening worldwide. And so if there is a patsy being set up, it wouldn't be at all revelatory to think that there may have been contact or tracking by various intelligence services. Okay? And if you think the Jews did it or the Israelis did it, and the WikiLeaks post I just shared confirms that for you, well, then you're, not really doing it right in my estimation. Or if it confirms that the CIA did it, same thing. And I'm not saying that neither of them did it. Okay? I would probably agree with you that the CIA was involved, George H.W. Bush is involved, and Israeli intelligence is involved. It's all global regime as far as I'm concerned. And George H.W. Bush, as part of the CIA, which is a globalist organization, for him to be involved on behalf of the global regime would not surprise me in the least. Okay? I expect that that's what it is. In fact, I expect that sort of process of responsibility applies about virtually everything scandalous and anti-American that has happened in our country for the last 100 years. All right? That's how much on board I am with your interpretation. I'm just saying that the new thing we got, that doesn't say that. And that's all. All right. I feel like you guys are doing okay. in the chat. Nobody's losing their shit on me for not knowing various details about JFK. All right. Wonderful. Let me see if we have anything else on this. And then let's just backtrack very quickly to Elon Musk in his Sean Hannity space jacket. Here is the patch on Elon's jacket. It says Starship 19. It has a white star, a yellow star, a red star, a blue star. The blue star has 4 points. And then it has what looks like the Starship Enterprise from Star Trek. I think that's what it's called. I'm not a Star Trek dork, although I did see it often when I was a kid. And I enjoyed it. I have nothing wrong with Star Trek, except for how dorky it is. I'm just trying to trigger people. It's going to be okay, everybody. Now, this is from USAFA, the Air Force Academy.edu. Squadron 19 returns to the Starship. Okay? So what we have here are 2 patches, the one on Elon's jacket and then the updated patch. And it says the original Starship 19 patch includes the iconic Star Trek phrase, "where no man has gone before." That is the one that Elon is wearing. And the revised patch has been modernized with the new motto in Latin, "live long and prosper." Right? So Elon is wearing a patch that says, "where no man has ever gone before," with a fictional spaceship on it. And all of that is totally normal and does not in any way refute all of the many elements of this story that people have chosen to believe absolutely must have happened. And I just want to give one more. Just want to show you again. This is the Elon Musk jacket, okay? That is clearly the patch. Musk on the right chest there. He's got a picture of Mars on his T-shirt, and he looks like a bit of a spaceman himself right there. When you put on that spaceman bomber jacket, you just immediately become an astronaut. Bay Theater Dave says that looked like the NCC 1701 Enterprise. I knew for a fact we would have a high-quality Star Trek dork in the chat, and thank you very much, my friend, for providing me that information. Or maybe you just used the machine very quickly and got us all the way there. So, very real. It could never be anything but real. And to suggest that it could be anything but real is a conspiracy theory. It is not, however, a conspiracy theory to believe in Kabbalistic cosmology. And let's just take a second. I'm sorry to jump back to a prior topic, but with the spacemen and all of this, it just really does become a little silly for me to be consistently subject to people who want me to prove things they believe are false when they cannot take the first step in proving those things to be true and have no idea where these beliefs or even the claims came from. So Kabbalistic cosmology, and this is Talmudic Jewish mysticism, and modern scientific cosmology share several intriguing conceptual parallels, though they emerge from fundamentally different methodologies. Wow, I can't speak. Mystical versus empirical, okay? So you have to accept right off the bat that all of these claims from science were actually the product of the scientific method, okay, of experimentation, of the formation of hypotheses, the testing, then moving on to the theoretical level, and then later they could be proven false in the future with more evidence. The problem is that's not actually the method that produces these claims that are so-called science. For instance, most of these claims, like the distance to the sun or the speed of light, by the way, which is no longer a constant, they're simply proven through mathematical equations. Okay? That's not direct scientific evidence. That's not testable, except to say that, well, yes, if the assumptions in your mathematical equation are true, then I can confirm you have done the math correctly. And that's ultimately what they're doing, because, of course, they cannot test the distance to the sun. It's one of those things, man, where it's like the people who believe all the science think I'm being retarded right now. And what can you do about that problem? There's nothing you can do about that problem. They believe that the science is the authoritative source. And that is what the science purports to be, the worldly authoritative source. Okay? It's not information from God and infallible. It is, and they admit, the best we've got in our worldly knowledge. Well, no, it's not. The best we've got in our worldly knowledge is derived from the actual scientific method, from logical reasoning, from personal experience, etc. It's not from guessing about what the makeup of the universe is and then proving it by fitting mathematical equations to observations until everyone realizes that's not really how it is. These are claims from Kabbalah that are reflected in our modern scientific understanding. The universe begins as a dimensionless point. Science says the Big Bang Theory posits the universe originated from a singularity. So the claim from Jewish mysticism is exactly the same as the claim from modern science. And a few months ago, it was true that the Big Bang occurred 14 billion years ago. And now it's true that the Big Bang occurred 28 billion years ago. Okay? Both things are true. Well, one of them was true. Now, the scientific method has replaced the one theoretical understanding with the other. You see, they did more science to it. Of course, there's no way to actually do science to a claim that suggests the universe is 14 billion years old, emerging from a single point where first there was no mass and now there is all the mass in the universe. Actually, sorry, that little single point contained all the mass in the universe, or some bullshit, whatever it is that they use to explain this at any given time. Kabbalah says the divine light expands to form the cosmos, described metaphorically as an unfolding process. Science says the universe has been expanding since the Big Bang, evidenced by redshift observations. Okay? So they look up at the sky, they see a phenomenon, and then that proves to them that the universe is expanding the same way the Kabbalah says. It inflates. The divine contraction creates a vacuum for cosmic emergence akin to space itself stretching. In science, the cosmic inflation describes rapid expansion of space-time shortly after the Big Bang. Black holes, the Ra from Kabbalah, the holes, symbolize portals between realms, reflecting duality and hidden unity. And in science, and by the way, there's portals. If you read the book of Enoch, they talk about portals. I'm not suggesting that none of these things are possible in this. I'm just showing the obvious connection between these and the fact that all of the theoretical physicians are Talmudic Jews is just like a coincidence. Science says the black holes warp space-time, potentially acting as wormholes to other regions of the universe. And all of this has entered pop science and the collective consciousness, and people actually now believe that these Kabbalistic claims, reinterpreted and repackaged in modern theoretical physics and science are true because science provides the authoritative source. Until it's disproven, of course, you have to directly disprove it. You can't understand, actually, the scientific method is not being practiced in the first place. Science, as a source of worldly authority, is already failed and admittedly failed. But then we have the science, which takes whatever the scientific method can produce, and it can produce a great many things. I mean, look, I am being delivered to you on the internet right now through human innovation, which applies diligently and necessarily the scientific method. It can only do the things that worked, okay? Which means that it's going to be followed throughout the process of innovation, which is why we don't need the science. We don't need the academic science at all. We can just be fine with innovation, okay? People want to launch rocket ships and try to escape our earthly cage so that we can drift out through the black infinite void and travel 400 miles to Mars to save civilization in 20 or 30 years. By all means, go for it, okay? And I guess there has to be some standard at some point by which we could say, gosh darn it, I guess they made it. But I'm not even sure that's possible. In fact, I think it's not possible. The proof mechanism, I'm not sure is possible. And do I believe that people are going to go establish a civilization on a planet through the black infinite void? No, I don't. But if you do, that is just fine. Let's move on from that. That wasn't even what I wanted to talk about today. We have done an hour and 45 minutes. The epistemology is the problem. It really is. Just down at the bottom of everything, the epistemology is the problem. And the epistemological problem is not solved by providing links and sources and providing proof that things are fake. Proof that things are fake doesn't exist. Okay? Unless you want, like, the science documenting on its own in all the secret science files. Yeah, hey, you know, we're really concerned that, like, space isn't actually real. Like, where's that going to come from? If you're going to believe things that can't be proven to you and then ask people to provide evidence that those things aren't true in order for them to prove to you that they're fake, well, then your epistemology is terrible, and you have set people up with an impossible task that will never be completed. So what you have done is excuse yourself from ever having to practice a first principles approach, relying always on claims of authority, and then requiring others to provide evidence that by definition cannot exist to disprove you. And then you're calling other people irrational. That's insane. And as I mentioned yesterday, the reaction to the Spaceman Splashdown should provide an absolutely clear illustration for why people still believe that our elections are real. If you want to know why our elections have not been fixed, that epistemological problem is why. It's not for lack of evidence. There is overwhelming and obvious evidence. There's no evidence that Joe Biden received 81 million real lawful American votes. And Donald Trump is just confirming that right there, as we saw at the beginning of the show. The epistemology is the problem. There's no way to fix that problem without the epistemological concern being addressed, okay? The normies are not going to wake up from your links and your sources or Tucker Carlson or Vince or The Blaze or Fox News or any of the rest of it, no matter how many links and sources you send around. That's not how people wake up, okay? People wake up by being jarred out of their experience. absolutely no other way. That's the only way I woke up. It was proven to me that if I continued down the same path, I would be continually harmed by that choice. Okay? I had been harmed enough a series of times. And when the governor of California snapped his fingers and said, hey, your 15-year career, you don't have that anymore. That caused me to say, oh, wow, the government is prepared to destroy my livelihood. And the fact that I am speaking out about that is serving to further destroy my livelihood. And that is incoming from people who I thought were my friends and who I thought were intelligent. Okay? Those are jarring experiences to have. That's how people wake up. I haven't seen one person over the last few years wake up in a process other than having their lives affected in serious ways. There are people who change their opinions based on the collective opinion and how it's being shown to them. But they're doing that based on the incentive and punishment structure within the party of false decorum. They don't want to look stupid in front of other people, so they adjust, they continually and gradually adjust their opinions to continue showing themselves in the same place that they were relative to others before. All right? People might begin to move their opinions, for instance, toward supporting Donald Trump, whereas before they were conservative but didn't like Trump. Now they're conservative but do like Trump because everybody else likes Trump, at least until everybody else doesn't like Trump. And then they will go right back to where they were, not liking Trump. And if you think that's not the case, I would submit as evidence everything we watched from the beginning of the very deadly pandemic until the moment that Donald Trump was confirmed as the Republican nominee for president in the fake campaign leading up to the fake election, which, it's important to remember, happened just days after the assassination event number 1 in Butler, Pennsylvania, that is still entirely unsolved. But it does have a patsy. It does have a patsy. We have a lone gunman, right? Just like Lee Harvey Oswald. So great. The only cure is the epistemological cure. The epistemological cure does not come from links and sources on the internet. Brogent says, did you see Dictator Supreme's statement on Trump bad, immigrants good? Maduro used every talking point as uniparty left. A glorious move from our boy. Brogent, I would absolutely love to see that. If you have a link on that you would like to drop in the chat, I would be overjoyed to engage in that glorious subject matter. Everyone knows there are few things I like more than whatever the base dictator is doing. He is by far. I'm checking out the Substack live stream and seeing if there's a live chat there. I wonder if it's going to feed the chat that was happening, but I suspect not. Although maybe I'll just leave the window open and I'll just see if it populates over time. I'm very pleased with Substack for providing a live streaming platform. This has made the process of the subscriber stream much easier. I know there's a little bump for some people. I understand. But I think in the long run, this is going to be much easier and also more beneficial to me relative to Rumble. And at this point, it's like trying to grow the show through doing the live streams or whatever. Hopefully that works. I don't know what it is. You know, I'm clearly not talking about things that the mainstream is going to connect with. And if growth was my priority, I would be doing that. Growth is not my priority, but it would be nice. And the fact that it is not is going to maybe make that impossible in the short term, but the hope has always been that in the long term, it will be much more productive to have exercised that approach. I remain confident that we are going to reach that next stage. And if we don't, it will be at my expense. And, what are you going to say about that, right? If we don't reach that next stage, then no amount of trusting the plan probably would have gotten us there. So let us go to the issue with the courts. It is now being widely branded on X, formerly Twitter, as a judicial coup being waged against Donald Trump and the Trump administration. Now, I think that is a fine branding for what is happening. It's not a perfect branding, and we will get into why. Let's go ahead and we're going to watch some of the meltdown, or I guess what initiated some of the meltdown. It was an interview on CNN on, pretty sure this was Monday, almost positive it was Monday. I suppose it could have been yesterday in the morning. I think it was Monday. Let's just take a second and watch Stephen Miller with CNN's Casey Hunt.
Okay. Do you think the Supreme Court has any say over this or not? Does the Supreme Court of the United States have any say over the things that you were just outlining right here?
I believe what the Supreme Court will say is what I just said, which is that the president's conduct here is not subject to judicial review.
Okay, but you are acknowledging that they do, in fact, have a say here, even though you think they may agree with you.
What we are expecting is the Supreme Court to say what has always been the case, which is when the president is using his powers as commander-in-chief, those determinations are not subject to judicial review. In other words, the president's designation of Trinidad as a foreign terrorist organization and as an alien enemy are part of his inherent plenary authority. There is no way.
At what point in the system, Stephen,
how are you going to expel?
Power?
How are you going to expel illegal alien invaders from our country who are raping little girls, who are murdering little girls, if each and every deportation has to be adjudicated in a district court judge? That means you have no country. It means you have no sovereignty. It means you have no future. It is fundamentally incompatible to have a country and have individual expulsions adjudicated by a single district court judge.
I'm just trying to figure out at what point in the system do you, because what does the Trump administration believe? Because we do have separation of powers in this country. I hear what you're saying.
Yes,
you're saying the district court does not
this is the judiciary
have authority.
Interfering
Stephen,
in
let me finish.
The executive function.
That
is the separation of power. That is the separation of power.
Did you ignore the judge's order here because you thought you could?
So the judge's order and the actions.
Let's pause on that for a second, and they're going to argue about whether or not the judge's order was ignored. That is the far less relevant part. They are attempting to give justification for calling all of this a constitutional crisis to make it look like Donald Trump is somehow violating the Constitution in such a grave way that it threatens to tear down our entire democracy. The case that they have been making for 10 years now, unsuccessfully. Donald Trump came down the escalator in the middle of June in 2015. In 3 months, it'll be 10 years that they've been calling Donald Trump a threat to democracy. And at no point has Donald Trump been a threat to democracy. Okay? So, they started this conversation off, and there are 2 points that need to be made here. And one of them is kind of a waypoint to the second one. And Stephen Miller is describing the process, not that Casey Hunt understands what he's saying, or maybe she does understand, and she is trying to redirect what he's saying so that the audience will not understand. He says that the case might be brought to the Supreme Court, and that the Supreme Court would affirm that the courts have no say in Donald Trump's declaration of an invasion or how he handles that invasion. Okay? So that is point one. Then she was saying, but you do agree that the courts have to say, blah, blah, blah. Okay? That is a question about judicial review and whether or not the courts are even allowed to direct the executive branch in the fulfillment of the duties of the executive branch. It is highly unlikely, in my estimation, and I think that you would probably agree, that the Supreme Court is going to reverse its own precedent, thereby giving away its own power. Now, suppose it's possible that the people Donald Trump has put in place on the Supreme Court are so committed to a strict interpretation of the original Constitution and the intent of that Constitution that they will overturn Marbury v. Madison and the finding by John Marshall that judicial review is somehow inherent in the Constitution, that the judiciary is actually allowed to be the final actor and judge on what is or is not constitutional, and that the other branches must at all times subject themselves to following whatever it is the judiciary decides. Okay? So there are two separate questions. It is entirely possible that this issue gets taken to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has the narrow interpretation and says the courts have no say, these district courts, they have no say in whether or not Donald Trump determines that illegal immigration by cartels can constitute an invasion, or, sorry, I just totally lost track of that, thinking about the example of the invasion. And let's just take a sidebar on that. If a force of 100 special operators from North Korea was dropped into Los Angeles, California. Actually, let's make it even gayer. Into San Francisco. Would that be an invasion? If they just dropped in on the ground, paratrooping in, and just started shooting people in San Francisco, would that constitute an invasion? And would Donald Trump be within his rights as the plenary authority of the executive branch and the commander-in-chief of the military, tasked with dealing with the national security of the United States of America, would he be justified in calling that an act of war and an invasion? And I cannot imagine that there is anyone in the world who would say the answer to that is no. It's Trump's authority, it's Trump's decision as president to declare that invasion. That is a much clearer example, right? Because these are special operators. These are special forces of a rogue adversary state. And I know that Little Rocket Man is the second coolest dictator, sometimes the first. But we can understand it in that sense. So if we're talking about 100 high-level members of this very brutal cartel coming into the country through the illegal slave trade, facilitated by the global regime, factions within our own country that want to destroy this country, and those people come in and begin immediately doing things that are destructive of our society, why is it an invasion in one case and not the other? All right. So the logic is going to be impossible for the courts to refute. And that's the simple one. All right. The Supreme Court can easily say Donald Trump is acting within his purview right here. There is precedent for it. He can declare an invasion. He can deem the United States to be in a state of war based on an invasion, an act of war being done to the United States. And therefore, in his authority, in the executive branch, he is well within his limits to do all of this. So Stephen Miller is saying they can go to the Supreme Court. We'll get that decision. I have no doubt that they'll agree. And she says, well, what about the other? And so that's the question. The question ultimately comes down to judicial review, and we will be working our way back there. Hold for processing for just a moment. John Roberts, the Chief Justice of that very Supreme Court, inserted himself into the conversation earlier in the week. This is from the Associated Press, updated yesterday, but the story originally dropped on Monday. Roberts rejects Trump's call for impeaching judge who ruled against his deportation plans. In an extraordinary display of conflict between the executive and judiciary branches, Chief Justice John Roberts rejected calls for impeaching judges Tuesday, shortly after Donald Trump demanded the removal of one who ruled against his deportation plans. So maybe that was yesterday? Gosh, I thought that was Monday evening. But I'll take it. The rebuke from the Supreme Court's leader demonstrated how the controversy over recent deportations of alleged Venezuelan gang members has inflamed tensions over the judiciary's role, with a legal case challenging Trump's actions now threatening to spiral into a clash of constitutional powers. For more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision, Roberts said. The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose. And so that would require that the court's decision ultimately would rule the day no matter what, if we are to still exist in a society that has judicial review. He's saying the only recourse, if you think this district judge has made a wrong decision, is you appeal it to a higher court and then eventually to the Supreme Court. And that is where these matters will be adjudicated. But you can't say that the judge has done the wrong thing and therefore must be impeached through what is a democratic process. Okay? If the system was working properly, the way it was designed, then that impeachment of judges would come either from the elected representatives at a local level or a state level, and then ultimately at the federal level. And those representatives would be directly accountable to the people. So the people would express their will and consent through these representatives, and then the representatives expressing that will and consent would have the ability to remove judges from their positions when those judges are acting in ways that are antithetical to the Constitution. That is the quote-unquote democratic process that the founders would have recommended. Certainly the anti-federalists would have. That is what it means for government to be of, by, and for the people. Okay, that would ultimately come down to the people. It's not this just goes up through the judicial process, and if the people's will and consent and their interpretation of the Constitution is totally violated at the end of that, then everyone in the country is nonetheless subject to the Supreme Court's decision. That was never the process. But judicial review makes that the process, and that is what Justice John Roberts is ultimately upholding here. Okay? There's not really another way to take that. He is protecting the existence of judicial review in this scenario. Now, I just clicked over to the Substack window. It turns out that there are some Substackers over there chatting away. And it's interesting because the attendance on the Rumble side is much lower, and I think it is migrated primarily over to the Substack platform. Dave, I just got your link. I feel like you're making a funny joke, and I am going to engage in your joke in a few moments after we get through the judiciary segment here. Okay, so all of this is coming from Judge Boasberg's opinion in the courts on Saturday that we discussed on Monday and we discussed on Devolution Power Hour in issuing his orders to turn the planes around. And I think that did not happen. Certainly some of the planes made it to their destinations, but in just a moment, I'm going to go through. Actually, you know what? Let's pause on the Boasberg. No. Let's go through the Boasberg stuff, and then we'll get to Michael Schellenberger, who himself is a purveyor of files and a truster, a worshiper of the authoritative sources. He is also a child-brained communist, so what are you going to do? He thinks he is not a communist, which makes it only that much worse. He actually thinks he's like based in red-pilled. Oh, boy. Sean Davis from The Federalist, a series of posts here. He said John Roberts personally placed James Boasberg on the FISA court that rubber-stamped illegal spy warrants against Donald Trump. In case you're wondering why he's setting his own credibility on fire to defend Boasberg from impeachment investigations. That may be the case, or maybe he's simply protecting judicial review as an accepted practice, okay? Or we should always leave open the possibilities, or it is entirely possible that they are just executing their roles in the grand plan of it all in exactly the ways necessary to produce the desired results, okay? Whatever Boasberg is doing, intentionally as a good guy or unintentionally as the worst bad guy, it is leading us to the point where we are getting some clear distinction about what the courts can have any say in and what it is the courts say ultimately means. And the truth is, it might be nothing. And that might be the limit to their role. They opine on the constitutional matters in front of them, okay? And they can obviously, as I said, deal with issues of court precedent, but that is a lower level concern. Upon opining, it would then be a matter for the people who theoretically would control the government of, by, and for the people to determine whether or not they believed that the court's opinion held. And if they trust the court in their interpretation of the constitutional matter, then they would use their power as the people to potentially remove the president or members of Congress or whatever, who would themselves be violating the Constitution in the eyes of the court if the people find the court to be legitimate. Let's go on with Sean Davis. He says, John Roberts didn't just go out of his way yesterday to trash Trump on a purely political matter, impeachment of corrupt judges over which Roberts has no authority. He did it by selectively leaking his statement to left-wing corporate media outlets, lying about its nature, claiming it was only in response to press inquiries rather than a general statement, and then refusing to provide the full statement to conservative media outlets when requested, including The Federalist. To date, no one knows the full extent of what Roberts and his taxpayer-funded PR agents have said, because no record of any statement from the court can be found anywhere on the Supreme Court website, a shocking breach of protocol and transparency. That's kind of interesting. And I mean, interesting in the sense that if statements aren't where they should be and these things begin to become questionable, you have to start wondering about whether we are only dealing with narrative ops here and not anything that represents something official in the matter. Did the left-wing corporate media outlets handpicked by Roberts to receive his political rant print it in full, or did they selectively quote it? It is impossible to know because the Chief Justice is refusing to be transparent about what he said and who he said it to. I've now asked the Supreme Court Public Information Office 5 separate times to be provided a copy of Roberts' full statement. I was hung up on twice, rudely told to send an email by someone who thought that was easier than just answering why the statement wasn't on the Supreme Court's website, and have sent multiple email inquiries that have been ignored by government employees whose sole job it is to respond to media inquiries. Do these sound like the actions of an impartial jurist doing his best to defend the Constitution and the rule of law, or does that sound like something a nakedly political partisan activist would do? Well, if those are the only two options, it's the second one, as he implies, but I would say those are not the only two options. Any plausible possibility we have to leave open. There are things happening here that we are not privy to. Taking the surface interpretation of things is necessary to understand it on that level, but that doesn't mean it's the only interpretation. And so if we assume that it is, we are probably leaving ourselves open to what might be a deeper underlying truth that we are not accounting for. The possibility, for instance, that this is some narrative op meant to lead us down this road toward the reversal of judicial review, which I think we're going to have to get to. You would think an institution, this is Davis again, you would think an institution that nearly got 2 of its own members killed after a link of its deliberations, and again, we would have to believe that the assassination stories about Justice Kavanaugh and I think it was Gorsuch were true, and that their lives were actually in danger from the leaked Dobbs decision. Can't say it's not true. I'm saying it's a story. It's information among other information. We've had a great number of info ops of that variety, and we've got the constant swatting stories coming out now. Are those real? I don't know. I have no reason to believe that the people claiming to be swatted are presenting any threat to any protected regime narrative whatsoever. They're not particularly influential voices. So that's baffling to me. But hey, man, I'm not trying to discount someone's experience. You got to understand that. But I am willing to. Okay. Like if that's what happens, I'll be like, okay, my bad. We're trying to figure out a problem that is far more complex than I think most people give it credit for being, I should say. And questioning things like this, in my estimation, is absolutely necessary. And I would be happy to apologize to people actually harmed, but otherwise, no apologies. So let's continue. So you would think that after the assassination threats, they would go to great lengths, I think is what that means to say, to make sure all statements and records of the court would be transparently provided to everyone at the same time, as opposed to leaking statements and comments about them from Supreme Court PIO staff to select news outlets for the purpose of politically shaping coverage. You would think that, but you'd be wrong. We have known for more than a decade that John Roberts is a political schemer, not an impartial jurist. His latest anti-Trump rant and his refusal to be honest and transparent about it only makes his gamesmanship more obvious and more dangerous to the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. And I am happy to accept all of that as written. Don't think Sean Davis is trying to trick anyone, okay? Just not sure that he's right. One more post from Sean Davis. Once again on X, formerly Twitter. And Sean Davis, by the way, I don't think I said this, is the CEO and co-founder of The Federalist. The other co-founder, if I'm not mistaken, was Ben Domenech, who plays his role on television as Meghan McCain's husband. So he's probably BFF with Tulsi Gabbard as well. He's also a raging cuck on, I think, Fox News, if he's still on there. He was for a long time. He is one of those sometimes Trump people that is vehemently anti-Trump when he thinks that Con Inc. and the GOP establishment and elite, the neoconservatives, have a chance to hurt Trump. And then once that chance is gone, he will be pro-Trump to the extent that their interests are aligned. For more than 2 centuries, the question of whether to impeach judges has been left solely to the elected representatives of the American people. John Roberts has no say in the matter, regardless of how much he wishes otherwise. Our Constitution gives John Roberts no power whatsoever when it comes to judicial impeachment, and it certainly doesn't give him power to reject congressional impeachment when and if it comes. In fact, this unbridled arrogance from Roberts is the precise reason judicial impeachment is now being demanded for rogue judges. Had Roberts done his job and restrained inferior judges, and he means inferior courts, not the superior court. Not that they're low quality, although they also might be. Restraining inferior judges from overstepping their bounds and claiming for themselves authority and power which does not belong to them, we would not would not find himself in this predicament. And sometimes I am misreading these things. That time, Sean Davis messed up, which is all good. It's just Twitter. These calls are happening precisely because of John Roberts, not in spite of him. What John Roberts needs to understand right now is that his continued cowardice in the face of lawless judicial insurrection against the elected government of the people, not rightful criticism of judges, is the fatal threat to the legitimacy of the judiciary he idolizes. Well, the good thing is that not only is the judiciary threatened in their legitimacy and probably illegitimate, certainly Ketanji Brown Jackson has no business there. The elected government of the people is not actually elected and is similarly illegitimate. The only one with legitimacy seems to be Donald Trump. He has the obvious and overwhelming mandate from the people, and no one else does. The more he acts like a craven politician, the more we are going to treat him like one. A smarter man than him would understand that the moment the Chief Justice is viewed more as a slimy politician than a fair judge, it is over for him and his precious judiciary. Maybe this is the path to seeing Justice John Roberts replaced as Chief Justice. That would be wonderful. So Roberts has gone against the idea of judicial impeachment. And that is, nonetheless, the only recommended option that we are being given from Con Inc. They are enraged to begin impeaching judges. And I'm not opposing the impeaching of judges. There are also some in the more pro-MAGA side of the Con Inc. thing saying, just wait and take your time, but still playing into the trick and still affirming judicial review in their analysis. Judicial review is the problem here. The idea that the judges have the final say on all of these things is itself the problem. And it is not a problem that can be cured simply through impeachment. The judicial review has to be removed. We're going to come to that in a little bit, but a couple more examples here. Then we'll get into Schellenberger, and then we will get around to judicial review. And I keep threatening to talk about Russia and Ukraine, but if we don't get there today, maybe we'll get there Friday. I mean, what do you really need to know? They're negotiating about stuff that happened a long time ago and was decided a long time ago. And the deal that they finally reach is going to be the deal as it already existed before the very brutal invasion ever began. And comedic actor and blah, blah, blah. I want more money. Everybody's mad at Trump because he's giving these things away. We're going to be told that Trump gave away Crimea, even though Crimea has been Russia for 11 years now. And blah, 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 blah. Ukraine, Russia. Okay? So there, I did it. Oh, man. People are like, no, you have to engage in the details of these complete and total fictions. You need to tell us what's happening in Kursk. You need to deal with what Ukraine's response might be now that they're lacking U.S. intelligence if Russia happens to go after the Chernobyl nuclear power plant again. Okay. I guess someone will have to do that. We can leave it to Tucker Carlson and Vince Coglianese and Ben Shapiro. Jeremy Boring, not to steer too far off track here, but this is funny. There's Daily Weimar News. I was just trying to pull this up, and I almost tried to search it with Daily Weimar. That would have been more difficult. If only I had trademarked all of these things. Axios, Daily Weimar co-CEO Jeremy Boring to step down. He's going to focus on creative projects for the company. Okay. And so that probably means he's going to move onto the entertainment side. He's going to continue to host Daily Wire Backstage. Whatever. So Daily Weimar is going to have to lie about Russia, Ukraine as they've been doing for the last 3 years. And people will still watch it because they think that they are staying up to date on what is happening in Ukraine by keeping themselves trapped or being kept trapped by choice in a 3-year informational past relative to Putin's very brutal invasion. That's what it means now to be keeping up with the war in Ukraine. It's incredible, isn't it? That even the idea of keeping up with what is happening in the world has been inverted. Keeping up means consuming details of something that has been bullshit for 3 years. That's not a problem that can be solved with links and sources. That's an epistemological problem. If Russia and Ukraine end up at the status quo ante from February 2022, prior to Putin's very brutal invasion, then what happened? Was there any chance at any point, while Ukraine was never advancing in the war, but also never ceding ground, what would make anyone believe that anything has happened in the last 3 years? Nothing's changed. The control over the territory has not changed. Russia has controlled Zaporozhye nuclear power plant the entire time. That's something that's going to be negotiated. That has not changed. How is any of it possible? Well, I have an explanation, and I've been making that explanation now for 3 years. People don't like that explanation. You can't call things fake. Oh. You have to prove that they're fake. Otherwise, you're not allowed to say things. You can't say that the television is lying or else you're a fed. That's the one I've gotten the last couple of days. Someone told me on Truth Social that I sounded like a glowy for so stupid for that for the short clip I posted from a show back in early December. The clip was the 2-minute clip about how I was calling the pardons fake the entire time because Joe Biden's a fake president. And now over the last 3 months, we've seen obviously that the pardons are fake and they don't mean anything. And he called me a glowy because I said that Hunter Biden shouldn't be punished for fake crimes. Leaving aside the rest of the argument from the podcast episode, which he never listened to, and understanding that he had never listened to anything else I had ever said about the matter, or understanding that I had interviewed Garrett Ziegler multiple times about the Hunter Biden laptop and the report on the Biden laptop from Marco Polo. None of that. None of the fact that I have talked for endless hours about Joe Biden's 5 decades of corruption and criminality. None of that mattered. He just got mad at my clip because it didn't say that Hunter Biden needed to go to prison for lying on a gun form and for tax violations. And then someone today called me a fed for not being able to prove that space was fake because I posted that ridiculous video from like the 1960s showing like what it sort of looks like for a spaceman to be in his spacecraft. And he was like, you're not telling people that this isn't actual footage of an actual spaceship journey. And because I didn't label the post, which was a forwarded post, by the way, with a caveat that that was not actually purported to be real footage of outer space, I was a fed. Because I was unwilling to provide him proof that space was fake. It's phenomenal. Phenomenal. And people think that that's being smart. Sorry for the rant. At some point, it's like, what can you possibly do with these people? Polymath, I will say that you are exactly right, and offense or not is irrelevant, and I'll leave it at that. Let us continue. Actually, while we're off on a tangent, I might as well see what Bay Theater Dave dropped in the chat on this link. He said, this video sums up the JFK stuff perfectly. Here we are from YouTube. I don't know what we're about to get. It's like a grab bag. Kentucky Fried Movie, scot-free.
Rams plagued by fumbles as earthquakes rock Los Angeles. Film at 11.
New from Barker Brothers, a game for the entire family. Scot-free. Your team has just assassinated the president. Can you get away scot-free? Shake the dice and see. Great! You found a patsy. Go again. Bonus card. You get Jack Ruby to kill your patsy. That's good because dead men don't talk. Oh no, Abraham Zapruder films the assassination. Tough break, but now you go again. And a stroke of luck. 22 material witnesses die of unnatural causes. Now your opponent shakes again. Uh-oh, look out. Life magazine buys the Zapruder film. But you buy Life magazine and show the frames out of sequence. You're almost home. Now you must spin the public opinion board. You've done it! The public believes it. You're scot-free. Available from Barker Brothers.
That was a 10 out of 10. Thank you, Dave. Please send that to me on Truth Social and Telegram when you get a second, and I will forward that in both places. Create a clever caption, whatever you like. That was fantastic. Also, we have the Maduro statement here. Thank you, Brogent. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela categorically and forcefully rejects the proclamation of the United States government, which infamously and unjustly criminalizes Venezuelan migration in an act that evokes the darkest episodes of human history, from slavery to the horrors of Nazi concentration camps. Well, that is quite serious. Wow. Hold on, just down here. It says further on in the article, Maria Corina Machado, Julio Borges, Carlos Paparoni, and Leopoldo Lopez and others make up the criminal core that has repeatedly called for the imposition of unilateral coercive measures against the entire Venezuelan people. Wow, is this all a Maduro statement? It is all a Maduro statement. This is amazing. Okay, it's a pretty long statement, so I'm not going to go through this today. I'm going to post this up, and thank you very much, Brogent, for sending it over. The Maduro thing is amazing. And for those of you who might be listening and have not heard me talk at length about Venezuela, please, by all means, go back, search on Substack. Just take that, go to my Substack page. I'm your moderator.substack.com. You can look for the search icon up in the top, a little spyglass, and type in Venezuela and find the episode where I talk about the International Crisis Group report. Venezuela is one of the most interesting countries to study, I think, in the world. And the idea that Maduro is just some illegitimate communist dictator who is providing this great threat to the United States and insulting the United States or whatever is preposterously insane, I think. So let us get back to the judiciary issues. This is Reuters. U.S. judge blocks Trump's transgender military ban. District Judge Anna Reyes in Washington found Trump's January 27th order, one of several issued by the Republican president targeting legal rights for transgender Americans, likely violated the U.S. Constitution's prohibition on sex discrimination. Okay? The idea being that it is this judge's opinion that it is at least possible that Donald Trump might have violated prior opinion about what it means to not discriminate against sex. Okay? And that claim is going to override Donald Trump's plenary authority in the executive branch and as commander-in-chief to look after military preparedness. That's what's at stake here. Well, that's what the issue is. The judge says the cruel irony is that thousands of transgender service members have sacrificed, some risking their lives, to ensure for others the very equal protection rights the military ban seeks to deny them. And among those rights, at least in practice, is the right to join the military, declare yourself trans, then have the government pay for your transgender surgery and medications, while providing absolutely nothing to the military. And I know, hashtag not all trans. Please don't sue me, trannies. Jennifer Levy, a lawyer for the plaintiffs, praised the court for acting decisively and swiftly. This ruling pulls no punches. The court methodically documented the concrete harms this ban inflicts on brave transgender service members who ask nothing more than to serve their country with honor. Okay. All right. So we have another judge determining an issue that is quite obviously only in the purview of Commander-in-Chief. That's it. The idea that judges have the power to say, no, this class of people must be kept in the military is insane. And, you know, it seems like these are the things that should not need to be explained. The sensitivity to transgender Americans, okay? And we can totally be sensitive to people who believe they are someone else. That's got to be a very debilitating mental disability. And it is listed as such in the science, which is what gives them the ability to access the government funds to have their transgender surgeries paid for. The DSM, I believe, I haven't looked at this admittedly in probably a year or so, maybe a couple of years. But it has been listed as a mental disability. So that has got to be very difficult to deal with, and we can be sensitive to that extent. It doesn't mean that we should be up in arms about them being removed from the military, okay? Like, if you need hormone therapy constantly to maintain the identity that your mental illness suggests, well, then that's going to harm military preparedness, and nothing should be more obvious. But let us continue on. So there was another judge reversing a Donald Trump action this week. This is from the old gray lady, the American paper of record, the New York Times. Musk's role in dismantling aid agency likely violated Constitution, judge finds. Efforts by Elon Musk and his team to permanently shutter the U.S. Agency for International Development, that's USAID, likely violated the Constitution in multiple ways and robbed Congress of its authority to oversee the dissolution of an agency it created, a federal judge found on Tuesday. And again, this is just an affirmation of prior court precedent, which means prior court opinion and opinion only. The ruling by Judge Theodore Chuang of the U.S. District Court for the District of Maryland appeared to be the first time a judge has moved to rein in Mr. Musk and his Department of Government Efficiency directly. It was based on the finding that Mr. Musk has acted as a U.S. officer without having been properly appointed to that role by President Trump. Okay. And I guess this is also under the idea that Elon Musk is the one executing these orders, that he's responsible for the dismantling. Chuang wrote that a group of unnamed aid workers who had sued to stop the demolition of USAID and its programs was likely to succeed in the lawsuit. He agreed with the workers' contention that Mr. Musk's rapid assertion of power over executive agencies was likely in violation of the Constitution's Appointments Clause. The judge also ordered that the agency operations be partially restored, though that reprieve is likely to be temporary. He ordered Mr. Musk's team to reinstate email access to all USAID employees, including those on paid leave. He also ordered the team to submit a plan for employees to reoccupy a federal office from which they were evicted last month, and he barred Mr. Musk's team from engaging in any further work related to the shutdown of USAID. And the article goes on. By all means, go ahead and give that a look if you like. So we are dealing yet again with the idea that the court is going to be the final authority on what the executive branch is allowed to do. The executive branch in the Constitution, under a strict interpretation, is the full plenary authority of what happens in the executive branch. They vested that power in one man, one person, who would serve in that role. The Congress cannot set up an agency and then force the president to run that agency. It just doesn't even make sense. Okay? They can set up an agency in the executive branch, and then the president can choose to run that agency, but they can't force him to do it. Isn't it strange that what we're dealing with right now is the Congress being able to force the president to employ certain people in its government performing some certain function in the executive branch for which he's the plenary authority, even if he thinks it's antithetical to his agenda that he was elected to implement by the American people in an overwhelming and obvious mandate, legitimately, or I should say, it's hard to say legitimately and then say legitimate again, but he may well be the only legitimate person in the American federal government, to the extent we still have an American federal government, and that we're not just watching an ongoing soap opera as though it controls our entire lives, and that may well be what we're doing. Which, by the way, the solution to that problem is stop recognizing the authority of the government, focus your attention on local matters, and if we do that en masse, we might be able to actually push this thing over the line, make progress at least, and we will see. I mean, I'm constantly, just to be clear, I fully understand the irony of me continuing to engage in these matters at a federal level rather than just focusing all of my own energy at a local level. And I may well end up at a tipping point there at some point and be like, all right, this is pointless. I'm going to just focus locally. Yeah, that's entirely possible. I mean, sooner or later, the TV show has to end. Otherwise, all we are doing is watching a TV show forever. But I don't see, and I'm not trying to necessarily single myself out or anything, but I don't see other people addressing the epistemological concerns with any audience or effectiveness. And without that, I'm not sure how to solve the other problems. So if I am effective in that arena, maybe that's its own justification. I don't know. Let's go to Michael Schellenberger, also known as Schellenberger. Michael Schellenberger is a multiple-time guest of the Tucker Carlson Shillcast. He used to go on Tucker's show when Tucker was still on Fox News. And Michael Schellenberger, along with, what is his name? Matt Taibbi. And then for a time, Barry Weiss. And I think there were a couple of more. He was one of the primary people who put out the Twitter files. The Twitter files, we theorized at the time, may well just be a step-by-step, slow release of information to the public so they can understand that they were being censored by big tech. Or, as also theorized at the time, and again, I was called all sorts of things for saying, hey guys, I think you're getting hoodwinked. This looks like a limited hangout. It might be a limited hangout. No, you got to trust the plan. It's just we're just waking up the normies. We're waking up the normies. Okay. Are the normies directly addressing the problem of government censorship? No, not at all. The people around Michael Schellenberger who support Michael Schellenberger, like Tucker Carlson and Elon Musk, have declared to millions and millions and millions of people that actually Twitter is a free speech platform now. So that problem, even if it existed before, and it did, they admit, it's not a problem anymore, you see, because Twitter is a free speech platform. And if you want accountability for that state-level censorship, in coordination with big tech, well, you're not going to get it. And you will be insulted for looking back at those old issues rather than focusing on what's ahead. We have midterms to win in 2026. So Schellenberger took to X, formerly Twitter, and this here is a thread reader app thread. This is the full thread here. Every single Trump advisor, including and especially Stephen Miller, knows perfectly well what they did is unconstitutional. So that's what you're dealing with from Michael Schellenberger, frequent guest of the Tucker Carlson Shillcast and purveyor of the Twitter Files. Twitter star, supported and amplified constantly by Elon Musk. And he is certain that what they did is unconstitutional. It's up to the courts. And by the way, let's just address this quickly. The Constitution is written down. The original Constitution and the Bill of Rights written down. We can read the words. It is up to everyone to decide what those words mean and whether or not what's happening is constitutional based on those words. Not based on the amendments that were forced through later on without ratification, including the Reconstruction Amendments that totally inverted the original Constitution. Nor is it anyone's responsibility to respect court precedent. Court precedent and constitutional are not the same thing. Okay? Court precedent reflects opinions, and those opinions may have been adhered to historically, but just like the science, they can be overturned at any time with new evidence. The most important evidence is the people's obvious and overwhelming mandate. If the court precedent is not responsive to the people's obvious and overwhelming mandate, then the country no longer has legitimacy. Okay? So when they're saying that a disrespect of court precedent, which is just opinion, threatens to overturn, overthrow, tear down the country, the nation, the union of states, as it were, more properly, these people are trapped in that total inversion. And Michael Schellenberger, of course, exists almost entirely in a false reality. These people are held up as the experts, the influencers, the people who should be listened to. This is embarrassing stuff, but let's continue. It's up to the courts, not the administration, to determine whether it is non-justiciable. The administration must comply with the order until a higher court reverses it or sets it aside. That's how our system works. No, Schellenberger, you've been told that's how the system works. The Constitution says Donald Trump has the sole plenary authority to make the exact determinations the court is attempting to prevent him from making. Okay? That's what it says. That's how our system works. Not the way you make up. The court decides whether or not the issue is justiciable, which means they're allowed to weigh in on it. And upon deciding that they're allowed to weigh in on it, then they can weigh in on it in whatever way they like. And then it must be adhered to by the other branches of government. No, that's not how the system works. That's certainly not how it was intended to. If it works that way now, it's because of the overthrow and inversion of the Constitution. If the Trump administration continues with these obviously unconstitutional actions, then it will lose legitimacy, public support, and power it needs to pursue free speech diplomacy, which would be a very disappointing outcome. And he tags Marco Rubio. Why? In terms of losing legitimacy and public support, well, that's for the public to decide. And that will be a matter of whether or not they listen to people like Michael Schellenberger. And whose priority would it be in this scenario to support the position of Michael Schellenberger? Well, it would be the priority of those who have amassed near total power through the inversion of the Constitution and through the process of judicial review, which provides judicial supremacy, which allows them to thwart anything the actual mandated elected representatives of the people would determine to do within their own constitutional authority, which is up for them to interpret. Mind-blowing. And this is the man who everyone trusted to detail and help solve the free speech problem. He solved it by someone else taking over Twitter and then rebranding it as a free speech platform. And that's all that's happened, because it's not a free speech platform. They're just waking up the normies. They're just waking up the normies. I mean, how many of these people must eventually show themselves in full before people will recognize that actually, if they're lying back then, if they're giving an incomplete story back then, if they are clearly not operating to the best of their knowledge back then they're not part of some special, incredibly complicated super truther op to wake up the normies. He's not waking up normies here. Okay? Every word of this from him would have to be an intentional lie just to receive a backlash. This is Kamala level word salad and whataboutism by Stephen Miller. He knows better, which means he's gaslighting. Stephen Miller, this is the exchange. Casey Hunt, did the administration ignore the order from the district judge? It's a simple question. He says, I've answered it. I've answered it because the Department of Justice has made a filing in the court. But let me make another point. The judge in this case put the lives of every single person on those aircraft at risk. Now that is a distraction. Did he know the fuel in the planes? Did he know the flight conditions? Did he know the weather conditions? Did he know how many crew hours? Did he know the need for crew rest? Did he know any of that? No, this judge violated the law. Here's the part that matters. He violated the Constitution. He defied the system of government that we have in this country. Now, that last part, totally true. And these same district court judges didn't do a damn thing to stop Joe Biden from flooding this nation with millions of illegal aliens. Do these district court judges didn't any? No, I mean, this is just, I mean, it's calling it word salad during live television. Sometimes you say things and then you say other things, knowing that the listener will pick up where you meant to leave off. And when you reprint that, it's going to look like a mess. But they didn't issue any injunctions to save the lives of Jocelyn, I think that's Nungary, or Laken Riley, or anyone else. So he's examining the language here. He then posts James Madison from the Federalist, number 47, but it's not the Federalist, it's just Federalist, number 47. The accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. And that's not what's happening here. He's attempting to imply that Donald Trump, in his authority, in his plenary authority as the chief executive and commander-in-chief, is somehow amassing all of the powers of the other branches into the executive and then doing whatever he wants, which would be tyranny. But he's not doing that. He's not doing that. And his interpretation of the Constitution is sound. And that's the problem. What's happening here is that the courts, having given themselves final say and full authority to reject anything the other branches do, they have achieved judicial tyranny to the extent that is allowed to remain. And when they talk about expanding the Supreme Court, and they try to do these same things with what we saw down in Brazil, for instance, remember that with Alexandre de Moraes, and people like Michael Schellenberger were upset at that judge because he was threatening Elon and X, formerly Twitter, and free speech broadly, well, then that was judicial tyranny. They were trying to expand the courts and give the courts more power so that the courts could override Benjamin Netanyahu. And I know a lot of people are not convinced on our boy Yuhu, and that's fine. Based on his past and everything else, I get it. Let's not belabor that point. The regime was still trying in their proxy state of Israel to expand the courts so that they could create judicial supremacy there, the same as they have it in Brazil and elsewhere. This is one of the things that they do. They try to move all the power into whichever branch they control at any given time. And the judiciary is a wonderful one to do that in because people see them as the final authority on these sorts of questions. Okay? So he is legitimately supporting judicial tyranny and the opposite argument of the one he made about Brazil in his misinterpretation of what James Madison is saying. And he said every single Trump advisor, including and especially, oh yeah, that was the original post. So again, that is the guy who is waking up the normies. How is that man waking up the normies? He is putting the normies to sleep while convincing them they are understanding the Constitution. That's incredible. So let's go on quickly here. Donald Trump, because I want to get to one last thing, and then we're going to have to maybe do it in greater detail on Friday. And I think that'll be the right way to do it. This is Trump from yesterday in the morning on Truth Social. Oh gosh. See, I'm trying to do it too quickly, and then all right, let's start that over. This radical left lunatic of a judge, a troublemaker and agitator who was sadly appointed by Barack Hussein Obama, was not elected president. He didn't win the popular vote by a lot. He didn't win all 7 swing states. And he didn't win 2,750 to 525 counties. He didn't win anything. I won for many reasons in an overwhelming mandate. But fighting illegal immigration may have been the number one reason for this historic victory. I'm just doing what the voters wanted me to do. This judge, like many of the crooked judges I'm forced to appear before, should be impeached. We don't want vicious, violent, and demented criminals, many of them deranged murderers in our country, make America great again. Donald Trump is asserting that he, not the unelected judge appointed by Barack Hussein Obama, is the one with the mandate of the people. So if the government is of, by, and for the people, then he is the one acting according to the will and consent of the people, not the judge, no matter how the people might misinterpret what is happening now based on decades of indoctrination. Trump went on yesterday, if a president doesn't have the right to throw murderers and other criminals out of our country because a radical left lunatic judge wants to assume the role of president, then our country is in very big trouble and destined to fail. And again, he is exactly right about that. It is not somehow okay for the judiciary to eradicate the powers of the executive branch enumerated in the Constitution. That is the only legitimate, quote unquote, law of the land under which the people actually see themselves living. And that's what it was intended to be. And you can include the amendments if you want. I don't think that anyone should because they were not properly ratified. And if they're not properly ratified, and we can get to the Constitution, I mean, we're going to have to go back all the way through all this stuff. And it is unwinding through all this stuff, which is good. And now we are seeing with examples that are entering the public sphere just how pervasive this thing is. I mean, you guys have been listening to this podcast, I will assume, for weeks or months or years. And so you have heard me talk for a very long time about how we need to absolutely go all the way back through all of this, reversing all of this stuff to get back to at least the original Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and then maybe go further. Okay? Now you're seeing the process play out. And I've suggested that we're going through that process. You can see the process as it emerges in the public understanding through mass media, through that Donald Trump provokes, that his actions provoke and have continued to provoke now for 10 years. We are getting there. We're going directly at it right now. And, you know, the Schellenbergers of the world might want to lay down in front of the train, but the train is going to run over them. Let us continue. Just quickly, this is Badlands Media. State Attorneys General push to lift block on Tren de Aragua deportations. Okay. Led by Virginia Attorney General Jason Miyares, and he was elected in the Glenn Youngkin fake election of 2021, and South Carolina Attorney General Alan Wilson. The amicus brief is joined by the attorneys from 24 other states. The attorneys general argue that maintaining the restraining order endangers public safety and national security. Their brief defends Trump's executive order, asserting that the president has, quote, clear constitutional and statutory authority to remove Tren de Aragua members, and accuses the district court of overstepping its bounds. The core duty of government is to protect its citizens, Miyares stated. The president, acting within his constitutional and statutory authority, did just that by ordering the removal of TDA gang members who have no legal right to be in this country and pose a direct threat to Americans' safety. Okay? So those are practical grounds, but he did also assert the president's constitutional and statutory authority. So the constitutional authority is all that matters. The statutory authority is the aspect where Donald Trump is playing within the boundaries, the lines drawn on the field, the rules in the rule book in the false reality layer of the government. Okay. So we have the constitutional authority on the foundational layer. We have the statutory authority on that statutory layer. And then we have, did I say statutory on statutory? The false reality layer, statutory layer. And then we have the practical concerns, which are, you know, how the normie sphere interprets legal issues. Like, does this work for my priorities? Gay people should be allowed to serve in the military. Okay, well, that's not what they're deciding. The normie sphere is the way it is because of the public communicators in the normie sphere. They are not trying to wake up the normies. They are trying to keep the remedial class in the remedial class. Actually, they're trying to keep the advanced and normal students in the remedial class. Okay? And we're all teaching ourselves, right? I'm not the teacher of the advanced class. I am a student that has advanced past the remedial class. And I'm doing my best to continue advancing. And whoever wants to come along with me, that's wonderful. I'm not the teacher, right? I'm not an authority. I'm just a guy who tries to the best of my ability to apply sound epistemology and logical rationale to the incoming information and understand where this thing is going and where it must go if we are going to claim our birthright, which is the country, the Union of States we were told existed. That's it. Let us continue. So here is, and while we talk about that practical and pragmatic layer, which is legitimately not the issue, let's get down to an even more remedial layer. This is Anderson Cooper interviewing some former federal judge named John E. Jones, Johnny Jones, on CNN yesterday.
White House aides have been saying in recent days that federal district judges don't have the authority to rule against the president on a host of issues. Stephen Miller said judges have no authority to administer the executive branch.
The district court has no ability to in any way restrain the president's authorities under the Alien Enemies Act or his ability to conduct the foreign affairs of the United States. This judge violated the law. He violated the Constitution. He defied the system of government that we have in this country.
What do you say to that?
I think Mr. Miller probably needs to take a civics lesson because that's just patently untrue. I saw that interview, and he got himself overheated talking about his version of what he thinks judges can do and what jurisdiction they have. And Anderson, I got to tell you something else that I think has been a little bit forgotten, and I find this interesting. President Trump's late sister, who passed away a couple years ago, Marianne Trump Barry, is a former United States district judge and then was put on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. I happen to know her a bit. She was an excellent judge, very decent person. Donald Trump knows judges and he understands what judges do. And to intentionally misstate, as Mr. Miller and others in the White House have done, what judges have the jurisdiction and the power to do, and to trivialize federal judges the way the administration is doing, they're playing a dangerous game here with Judge Boalsberg.
So they're going to hurt people's feelings. These are the arguments now. These are the arguments. This is Newt Gingrich. Those upset by the emerging dictatorship of district court justices behaving as though they were president should read the Judiciary Act of 1802. Jefferson and his party completely revised the court system and abolished a series of Federalist judges they deemed illegitimate, a warning to the current out-of-control judiciary. So he's saying not only is there a precedent for getting rid of federal judges, Thomas Jefferson did it. What else did Thomas Jefferson do? Well, Thomas Jefferson opposed Justice John Marshall's gift to himself of additional power in the Marbury versus Madison decision. And I had a very interesting conversation with the machine yesterday. And I want to share some of that conversation, and we'll go through the perplexity conversation. And I also think maybe we can just start out by sharing this Truth Social post that I wrote yesterday. And this pretty well received, I would say, in general. I mean, Truth Social has become a bastion of the normie sphere at this point as well, and whatever. But the founders argued over the concept of judicial review and specifically and intentionally left it out of the text of the Constitution. 14 years after the ratification, which was itself forced through, Justice John Marshall claimed for the judiciary the very power the founders specifically and intentionally chose not to give the judiciary. It was a massive usurpation at the time, noted as such by Thomas Jefferson, among others. The idea that this is somehow a bedrock principle that must be defended is preposterous. The people are the absolute final authority on all of these questions. We are not our legitimate government subjects and do not require their granting of permission. We do not need to wait for the usurping judiciary to give away its powers. And I saw some back and forth in the chat about how we need to get this to the Supreme Court so they can make a decision. No, we don't. What we need to do is get fully behind Donald Trump in our encouragement of him simply not agreeing with the court and going ahead in the execution of his constitutional duties as the plenary authority in the executive branch and the commander-in-chief tasked with the responsibility of our national security. That's it. And people want the imprimatur of the television. They want the television to tell everyone else it's okay so that they can feel confident in their belief that it's okay. And I'm not making fun of anybody with this, okay? I understand these pressures are real. And again, this is like how I came to the party of false decorum, okay? This is how I came to understand it. I spent a great deal of time in 2020, during the summer of 2020, going on long runs every day, around the Hollywood Reservoir wearing my Keep America Great hat, pissing off all the yuppies and deranged Karens running around with their masks on, calling me a Nazi. And I was thinking, how is it that many people I care about, people I believe to be smart, people I thought were good, people I thought were my friends, some of my family members, the experts, the colleges, academia, the entertainment community, the corporate world, the political parties, all of this, how do all of these people keep professing such obvious nonsense whenever it's demanded of them? And I said, okay, well, it's clearly not about an information problem. They've all seen the conflicting information. They've heard the other arguments. But even if they'll admit to you in private that they know you're right, when they get in public, they won't say it. They won't go online and support any of it because they are concerned about the consequences. And so how does that dynamic apply to the rest of our lives? Turns out it applies across the board in our lives. And I don't remember where I initially got into the party of false decorum discussion. I lost my train of thought. Once you hit that 2.5 hour or 3 hour mark, man, the weave doesn't work like it does 2 hours ago. I will probably come back to it as we move along in this discussion. But oh yeah, it was about people finding the confidence in themselves to admit these things, not waiting for that consensus to be formed. Okay, the forming of consensus happens because more and more people reach the point where they are willing to publicly admit things. Okay. Now, I wish that was only an information problem, but it's not. It's a reputation problem, which means that if we're going to reach the next step, people have to be willing to let their reputations go in public and have people around them who they believe they get their reputation from attempt to eradicate their reputation. Okay. I have people trying to do that all the time. Every time someone is calling me a glowy on the internet, that person is trying to damage my reputation in front of the people who do not think that. Okay? When they're calling me like insane or pretending that I'm the retard for them not understanding how like claims of non-existence are processed, they are attempting to destroy my reputation in front of the people who might otherwise listen to me. Right? That is a game within the party of false decorum. And I understand those dynamics, which is why I don't operate on social media outside of those dynamics, except when I'm dealing with conversations from people who know what I'm doing. All right. So like the people who participate in my Telegram chat on a regular basis, I'm going to have conversations with those people and I'm going to take them seriously, take their claims seriously and ask them questions and whatever. People who don't operate that way, people who are trying to play a game with me in the party of false decorum will be summarily dismissed in as harsh and aggressive terms as possible. All right. Because I don't care about convincing that person of anything. I care about making sure that person knows that every time they attempt to play that game with me, they are going to lose that game in spectacular fashion to the point where it becomes no longer worth it to do that. Okay. And once they reach that point, then I don't have to deal with that bullshit. All right. It's a very simple game theory exercise over and over and over again. It works every single time. And I don't care at all that people are mad or will try to destroy my reputation. That's the price you have to pay for being successful at that game. Otherwise, you will find yourself eventually hitting a wall because the reputation with someone is going to stop you from saying the next thing that can't be said. And when you submit, the game is over and you have lost. Period. So, I hope that is understandable. Now, in order to form consensus, people need to accept that process and then speak up about it and say, no, Donald Trump is actually right. The court has no business telling the president he's not allowed to defend the country in the way he sees fit, because this is exactly what the overwhelming and obvious mandate of the people provides to Donald Trump, period. Okay? There's no other discussion. That's it. When we reach that point, the problem will subside. It will not subside before that. Now to perplexity, and I'll just review this quickly and then we'll move on and hopefully come back to this on Friday. So I asked the machine, what usurpations of the Constitution did John Marshall oversee aside from judicial review and Marbury versus Madison? And of course, it got very offended. Of course, there were no usurpations. And then it said this. In fact, his decisions and actions as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court were generally aimed at strengthening the federal government and interpreting the Constitution rather than usurping power. And it gives some examples here, but let's pause for a moment on those examples. What does it mean that a branch of the federal government has taken it upon itself to expand the power of itself? Well, that's a usurpation, just by definition. What does it mean that it is then justified as having strengthened the federal government? Who is the federal government strengthened relative to when a branch of the federal government usurps power not delegated by the people to that branch? It's usurping power from the people. Strengthening the federal government is a usurpation of power from the people. Can't be anything other than that. It is only that. Unless the people have delegated all those authorities, and then they are the ones strengthening the federal government. The federal government is not strengthening itself, particularly through one branch giving itself more power relative to an issue that was discussed by the founders and then dismissed. And that is what happened. And we are told that that was a good thing. These decisions, while expanding federal power and the court's authority, were based on interpretations of the Constitution and existing laws. They were not considered usurpations, but rather landmark rulings that shaped American constitutional law. It is worth noting that Marshall's decisions sometimes faced criticism and opposition, particularly from those who favored states' rights. And of course, the people delegate power to the states, and the states delegate power to the federal government. So anyone that is defending the people must be in favor of states' rights relative to the federal government, again, a usurpation. However, his rulings generally aim to strengthen the federal government and establish the Supreme Court as a co-equal branch of government rather than to usurp power illegitimately. Now, that is just gobbledygook from the machine, okay? But let's continue. I said, strengthening the federal government is by definition usurping power. And I said, of course, I'm incorrect and blah, blah, blah. It's important to distinguish between legitimate exercises of constitutional authority and actual usurpations of power. Except the Supreme Court, in making that decision to give itself judicial review, also claimed the judicial review that did not exist, making itself the final authority, able to rule what Congress did unconstitutional and then strike down an element of the Judiciary Act of 1789, which, by the way, must also be struck down at some point in this process. And we should be concerned not just with impeaching federal judges, which is what Con Inc. wants to do, or says they want to do. We should be concerned with abolishing the federal judiciary. The Constitution set up the Supreme Court and gave the Supreme Court power to set up other courts. These courts that operate under the bar system and our statutory law and common law in the United States are preposterous and not what the founders intended. So we go down based on these delegated powers. And I said, obviously, the Marbury versus Madison decision was not done within a constitutional framework. He did it by judicial fiat, which is, of course, true. And so finally, I got down to the areas where there is a dispute about Marshall's usurpations of power. And look at what he's responsible for. Marshall derived implied federal powers from the necessary and proper clause, arguing that the Constitution's enumerated powers must include all means which are appropriate to execute them. And so this is like the general welfare clause. Like, oh, it says the government is going to provide for the general welfare. And so that means that whatever the federal government deems provides for the general welfare of the country, they're allowed to do. Necessary and proper clause, same kind of thing. Well, they determined that it's necessary and proper that the federal government do this sort of thing. And therefore, that makes it, that determination, the opinion on it being necessary and proper, well, that makes it constitutional. And so the critics say expanded power, that this expanded power beyond the explicit text without an amendment. That is exactly what it did, just as Marbury v. Madison did. Marshall also broadly interpreted the Commerce Clause to include navigation and interstate economic activity. So it redefined commerce beyond its original meaning, traditionally limited to trade in goods. They asserted Supreme Court authority over state court interpretations of federal law, which centralized judicial power at the expense of state sovereignty. And there is also the misinterpretation of the Supremacy Clause. I saw someone in the chat mention the Path to Liberty podcast. I mentioned it many times on this show. Michael Bolden over at the 10th Amendment Center. I would suggest everyone get on board with that podcast and listen to it even before you listen to mine, if necessary, if you are in some sort of time crunch. And so I think we'll leave it there for the day, and then maybe we'll get into some of these other constitutional issues related to Justice John Marshall, because this guy is believed to be one of the heroes of not only American history, but of the judicial branch in particular. And it turns out that he is just one of the pioneers in overthrowing the original Constitution. This is the way, through judicial review, that the rest of the judicial precedent created after the Reconstruction Amendments, this is how it's persisted. And this is the infection that you can now see exist in the collective consciousness of the American people. The idea that the judges have final say on everything that is done. And I can only speak for myself, but I imagine it's true for the rest of you, at least the ones who attended public school. That's what I was taught in school, that is the power of the judiciary to say, the president can't do these things. These are unconstitutional. The Congress can't pass these laws. These are unconstitutional. And at no time is the appeal to the populace ever considered. So all they need to do is have fake elections, which they have, and the entire government is overthrown for all time. Okay? The judiciary isn't even accountable to the people's elected representatives. So even in a situation where we had real elections, if we can't impeach judges, it would take a generation at least to fix any of these problems, because the Supreme Court could just keep saying, no, that's wrong, no, that's wrong, no, that's wrong. We have judicial review. We have judicial supremacy. We are the final say on all of these things. What happens if we got legitimate elections and we replaced the Congress, the Senate, and the president? Well, I mean, we don't need to replace the president right now, okay? But you know what I mean. Replace them all in full with the legitimate, duly elected representatives of the people, doing the people's business in every scenario, following the original Constitution. If we still have judicial review and we still have judicial supremacy, and they cannot be removed through impeachment, and the other branches of government are subject to their authority and their opinion at all times, the game can't be over. It just can't be. Which means that it is necessarily the case that those things must be struck down. And we are on the path to doing that. And if that has to come as a factor of the federal government in its current form being abolished down to that original constitutional level, and perhaps even further, or maybe just the entire thing being fragmented and sent back to the states, then so be it. All right. I'm going to check the chat real quick. I don't think I missed any rants today. And I hope that those of you in the Substack chat and the Substack feed are doing well. I hope that watching it over there was a satisfactory experience for all of you. I think maybe we'll have that thing probably growing at a quicker pace, hopefully in the near term, and we shall see. But for the rest of it, I will be back on Monday. I'm sorry, not Monday. I will be back on Friday at the same reasonable time on the Same Reasonable Podcast Network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. They lied to you about everything. And Joe Biden was obviously never president.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
Can we stop this cruel game and allow the boy to keep one shred of dignity? For God's sakes! I can't stand to see him in all this pain! You vicious bastards! Let him move in with you! Is it so bad to see somebody happy? So just let him move in! For the love of God, let the boy move in with you! Good Lord!
And I will not let you down.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What? In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com. And for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.